Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was in Lord of the Rings. Sauron is defeated, his ring destroyed. However, when an old enemy of the Dark Lord takes advantage of the power void and seeks it for himself, the heavens look to the only match in withered hope. In a time where Sauron's human life had just ended, will he be saved and return to the light and save Arda? Or shall vengeance and power condemn him to shadow? The Dark Lord rises. Welcome aboard. Naruto, Sauron returns. Prologue. The world is changing. I hear it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. That which once was, is lost, for none now live who remember it. It began with the forging of the great rings, crafted by the greatest smith of the Second Age, Celebrimbor, Lord of Eregion. An image is shown of the Elf Lord as he works relentlessly over the rings of power, and behind him is the one known as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. The 3 elven lords are shown gazing upon their gifts. 7, to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. The dwarf lords all gaze upon their gifts before holding them aloft. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else, desire power. The 9 kings of men don in black robes and their crowns kiss their rings before placing them upon their fingers. For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race. But they were all of them deceived. For another ring was made. In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring, to control all others. Sauron stands in Mount Doom in his black armor, a silver smithing tool in his left hand and the ring on his right. And into this ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. Sauron stands out at the entrance of the Mount Doom and raises his right fist into the sky. However, Celebrimbor foresaw the creation of the One Ring and gave the elven rings to their masters in secret. Celebrimbor hands the rings to the elven lords and they vanish into the night. Upon discovering this treachery, Sauron himself besieged Eregion. Sauron is seen facing Celebrimbor before swiftly defeating him, and took him and his family to Mordor. The 3 elves are taken away after Celebrimbor gets a good terrified look at the One Ring. There he was forced to perfect the One Ring, making the Dark Lord even more powerful. But Celebrimbor did more than Sauron even asked for, given the ring a mind of its own, before taking the ring for himself. Thus the Bright Lord was born. He used his new power to claim half of Mordor and waged his own war against the Dark Lord in hopes of freeing his family and ending the darkness once and for all. Celebrimbor stood over the Dark Lord preparing to strike, when the ring slipped off his finger, and directly onto Sauron's, who then defeated the Bright Lord. But Celebrimbor's own alterations to the One Ring betrayed him and so fell the Bright Lord, leaving Sauron free to do as he willed. One by one the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring, but there were some who resisted. A last alliance of men and elves marched against the armies of Mordor. Elven and men armies face off against the dark forces of Sauron, and on the slopes of Mount Doom, they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. The fighting became vicious, many fell left and right, though the Dark Lord's forces were being driven back. Victory was near. Elendil lets out a victorious battle cry, but all commotion dies down as men and elves see the dark figure striding toward them. But the power of the ring could not be undone. Sauron stands before them before utilizing his full power and wiping out his enemies left and right, including the King of Men. It was in this moment, when all hope had faded, that Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword. Isildur reached for the blade only for Sauron to stomp on it, shattering it underfoot. And when Sauron reached for him, he used the broken blade to slice off his fingers and causing the Dark Lord to explode. The ring came to Isildur, who had this one chance to destroy evil forever, but the hearts of men are easily corrupted, and the Ring of Power has a will of its own. Isildur and his men are attacked by orcs. Isildur uses the ring to flee and swim away, but the ring slides off and he is shot by 3 arrows, slaying the newly made king. It betrayed Isildur to his death, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend, legend became myth, and for 2,500 years, the ring passed out of all knowledge, until when chance came, it ensnared a new bearer. The ring came to creature Gollum, who took it deep into the misty mountains, and there, it consumed him. The ring brought to Gollum unnatural long life. For 500 years it poisoned its mind. And in the gloom of Gollum's cave, it waited. The ring then abandoned Gollum, but surprisingly was picked up the most unlikely person imaginable, a hobbit, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire. He held onto the ring for a long time, and like Gollum was given long life, living easily to 111 before giving the ring to his nephew Frodo Baggins. Frodo was then thrust into a mission that was not of his own making, for it was then that Gandalf discovered the identity of the ring Bilbo and now Frodo possessed. And so, the War of the Ring had begun, battles were waged. Images of the battles of Helm's Deep and Minas Tirith in their most vicious moments. Heroes fell. Boromir in his last moments of life. Enemies defeated. Angmar and the Balrog in their moments of doom. And finally, the ring destroyed by Frodo Baggins, ending Sauron's reign. Sauron's tower exploding. Or so we believed. The Dark Lord became a harmless spirit, yet even then he proved his resilience, and it was then that he was given the chance to return to his own time. And there, the world would face the darkest of times since the first 3 ages of the world. Sauron looked upon those who defeated him, he cursed their names, especially the hobbits. He looked among them and wished death upon them. The time has finally come, stated a gentle voice. Sauron turned around and witnessed Cami in all her glory standing before him. Flowing white hair and a gentle face adorned upon Cami, on that face was one of pity and sadness. And yet there was hope in them as well. "If you think you can just drag me to the void, then you have come on a fool's errand," growled the spirit. The woman who had appeared before the black formless being frowned sadly, a sight that didn't fit right for even the Dark Lord. "You mistake me, I am in need of your help." This further caught Sauron off guard. A goddess needed help from the Dark Lord? They were polar opposites. "And what does the great Vala require of someone as tainted as I?" asked the shadow in disbelief. "To rekindle your will of fire," she said with a power in her voice. The words shocked the Dark Lord. Only his former master Morgoth knew of his past life. It was he who returned his past life's memories. "The greatest of the servants of Eru Ilúvatar, once you were given the most dangerous and darkest of responsibilities, none have sacrificed more than you." "How do you know my past?" demanded the formless spirit. The woman only smiled and stepped toward the shadow, touching where his face would have been. The spirit was surprised to feel contact. The gentle skin caressed what felt like his face. He was formless, he shouldn't feel it. But the time since he had last felt gentle contact like this, beyond 3 ages of the world. "Your past is this world's future, I know both lives you have lived. Here is the once champion of light turned greatest of dark lords, and the other the pariah turned hero who was wrongfully betrayed," she answered, her purple eyes having a certain glow in them as she looked upon her chosen one. The shadow flew back from the goddess. "Why would I ever go back to my betrayers?" asked the shadow. Cami looked upon the shadow with sorrowful eyes. "Did you forget your teacher's lesson?" "Look underneath the underneath," Cami asked. This struck a chord that Sauron didn't even know he had anymore. "What is your intent?" asked the Dark Lord. Cami gained a serious expression. "I am saying that though your ring is destroyed, the smith has not passed on." With that she felt the shadow grow in potency at hearing what she said. "Celebrimbor," he snarled, "he has been a thorn in my side for an age." "What has he done?" "It is what he will do, reclaim his ring of power. At this point in time he is planning to take over the world," Cami told him. "He will be taking his time since he believes you are gone. Unchecked, the bright lord's pride will consume all his reach covers. He will become a greater tyrant than you ever would. You know what happens should the light grow too bright and attempts to bring darkness to heel? The gate to the void shall shatter and out will come your predecessor. You are still my chosen one, he who shall either save all creation or destroy it." Sauron thought about it for a long hard time. "How? My power is gone, my ring destroyed, I've done everything asked of me. I am merely a tainted spirit, locked away within the cage of hell. It is amazing that my spirit is able to be out of the cage for this long. He looked upon his form. All who serve him hate and despise what I have become, but I never truly became close to them. It will be a different story there. You are asking me to take on the source of my deepest anger and not take vengeance. I have been the shadow for so long." It was then that Cami raised her closed hand to reveal a white flame. It was about the size of a candle, but Sauron looked upon it in shock. "That's..." Sauron gasped, in total shock of what he was seeing. "How do you have a piece of the fire of life?" Cami smiled. "I was being literal when I said that I am here to rekindle your will of fire." With that she placed it into the shadowy mist of his form. The flame vanished, but Sauron felt it, his power slowly returning. "This will take many ages for you to regain your strength, but not enough to regain your full soul, that is locked away within the cage of hell. After that it is up to you what you do next. But Eru has a test prepared for you, you will know when it comes." Sauron thought long and hard. "Very well, but understand this, I will get revenge on those who wrong me," he roared before vanishing as a flame in the dark clouds above. Very well, I just hope that when you face them you will realize who truly is friend and foe, Kami said before waving her hand and the black shadow vanished. Safe travels, Naruto-kun. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again. Chapter 1, A Lord of Gifts. Outside of the village hidden in the clouds walked a young man donned in pure white clothing, noble robes to be exact donned his figure. He stepped calmly to the gate of the village and stopped when he was ordered to by the guards. Halt! State your business in the village hidden in the clouds, ordered one of them. The noble-looking person smiled gently and kindly, looking up and pulling his hood down so that they could see his face. He was certainly a handsome man with long blonde almost white hair that reached his back, tan skin, and judging by his face and his clothing he was muscular yet lean. Greetings, my name is Anatar, and I am here to give a gift and token of goodwill to the Raikage, the young man told them. Knowing the name from the many individuals, gifting to lands far and wide, they immediately became welcoming and pleasant. The Lord of Gifts comes to our doorstep, please follow me and I will escort you to the Raikage's office. Anatar nodded and followed, smirking when neither looked at him. His plans were working splendidly. He followed behind the cloud shinobi while looking around. Kumo was certainly more militarized than other villages. Yet they certainly had a comfortable setting for those who were not. Anatar watched as he walked into the tower of the Raikage. It had a kanji that symbolized lightning. ANBU warriors were hidden in the shadows, were using their own types of ninjutsu to be unseen. Anatar walked on as if he knew not of their presence, though he certainly did, and it only showed by his small smile. Shortly after he was shown the office, where the Raikage was shown curling massive weights, he was without an undershirt to his kage robes. He wore white pants and gold bracers that looked like weights as well on his arms. As for his appearance, he was a rather dark-skinned man that had muscles that were developed to the greatest potential of a human. But even though he was the strongest ninja second only to the Hokage, he was the fastest ninja since the Yondaime Hokage. He was definitely a terrifying opponent, should he be faced on the battlefield. Anatar bowed low. Raikage-sama, thank you so much for allowing a humble man such as myself visit such a busy and powerful man. I do not wish to waste your precious time. The Raikage was immediately taken in by the compliments of the other man. It is nothing, we have been hearing of the Lord of Gifts, granting special gifts to all of the kage of every hidden village. It is an honor to have you in our presence, the Raikage said gruffly though kindly. You flatter me, Lord Raikage, he said as he stood up with a friendly smile. It just pleasures me to gift those who are in need or worthy. Then you have a kind heart indeed, the Raikage said friendly, but might I ask, what kind of person would be deemed worthy or in need? Anatar smiled, worthy by their strength and valor, and those who are in need of protection or comfort. I offer these things as tokens of friendship. Therefore, after years of tireless toil I have created these. With it he drew 3 rings, 2 fitting for a male and the other female. The first male's was made of a band of silver that was carved delicately with the forms of clouds and lightning dashing across them. The second into the shape of tentacles with the head of a bull with diamond eyes. The final was also a silver band, yet intricate designs of a feline were carved into them with sapphires for the eyes. They're beautiful, said aloud the Raikage's secretary. Anatar smiled. You flatter me, milady, however it is not just their beauty that should entrance you, but in reality, the power I have bestowed in them, he said smiling. This caught everyone's attention. What kind of power? Asked A, excited now about hearing about power. The first is for you, Lord Raikage, designed to increase the power of the kage of your village, enhance chakra, knowledge, and strength. The other 2. He held the others up. The power to help a Jinchuriki stay alive, even after their tailed beast is extracted. This caused everyone to go wide-eyed. What? That's impossible. Everyone knows that once a Jinchuriki loses their tailed beast they die within an hour. How could these rings possibly do this? I asked incredulously yet deep down if it allowed his brother and adoptive sister to live should they lose their tailed beasts, then he would take the offer. These rings will allow your Jinchuriki to store demon chakra within the ring and slowly it will adjust their chakra coils so that should their beast be removed, they will not only survive but keep enough replenishing chakra to be pseudo-Jinchuriki, he explained. This caused everyone to widen their eyes. Not only would their strongest shinobi survive, but they would keep some of their power? What is the catch? Asked the Raikage. Anatar only smiled. No catch, just a request that each shinobi may either accept or decline it of their own free will, he told them. Should they be willing, and at moments of their availability, I would like to be able to summon them only in times of great need. Other than that they are free to do whatever they wish. I thought about it for a good while. This certainly had its positives, and the negatives were minuscule. The problem, however, was more emotional than logical. the Jinchuriki were his family and he didn't want them to be in danger. I will allow it, however the final decision is up to B and Yujito, if they refuse. Do not worry Lord Reikage, I have no intention of forcing anything upon them against their will, as I said they are free to receive the gift and don't have to accept the request. Oh, and should they be in a tight spot they can use their ring to reverse summon to my location wherever it might be, or even summon me. I will be more than happy to assist in protecting them, the Lord of Gifts said, smiling politely. A smiled in kind. Very well, I shall call B here so you may discuss it with him. However, Yujito is another matter. I can tell you locations where to best find her, but it is unknown where she might specifically be. Do not worry, I am certain I can find her, he assured. Within moments B was in the room and after being explained the situation he walked up to the man and began to rap. Hey man, I appreciate the bling. You even need help from B, just give me a ring, he said, accepting the gift while a facepalmed at his brother's antics. Anatar nodded thankfully. If you will excuse me, I will go looking for Lady Yujito now. I nodded as the man turned and departed for the village. Chapter 2, The Curiosity of the Cat. Yujito was at her favorite training ground, which was more akin to an obstacle course that required a lot of acrobatics and agility, right up her alley. She took off running, leaping over the first hurdle with a front flip, running again the moment her feet touched the ground. As she did, the first automated trap activated and kunai were sent in her direction. She leapt forward, her body parallel to the ground as she spun to avoid the weapons. As she hit the ground, a large blade swung to cut her in half and she slid onto her knees, sliding under the weapon easily. She continued to run and suddenly the ground began to explode at intervals around her. She expanded her senses to read the chakra fluctuations before they exploded to avoid them. She then ran up a vertical obstacle that had been slicked with oil. When she got onto the top, she leapt up into the air, spinning as she tossed kunai and shurikens simultaneously, all hitting their marks dead center. Finally, her nails grew into claws and she brought them down onto a target in the center. She was panting slightly, but having worked her body to the very limit, she was always getting better. Suddenly she heard the sound of clapping and turned to see a man that she hadn't sensed even when she had been enhancing them. Impressive, most impressive, certainly worthy of your reputation, Yujito ni, the man complimented her. She instantly got into a stance. Anyone who could mask himself to that level is certainly someone to wary of. However, at the same time of displaying power, he also showed warmth to her. Seeing the sudden battle stance, he raised his hands in apologetic surrender. Oh, I'm so sorry, I did not realize that I was intruding. I was just very much impressed with your skills and was entranced, he complimented her. She lightened up a little in the face though kept her stance. Who are you? She asked. Again Anatar immediately took an apologetic tone and bowed. Forgive me. I cannot believe I've been so rude. My name is Anatar, I am also known as Dash, the Lord of Gifts. Yujito muttered in surprise. Immediately her stance was dropped and she bowed. Forgive my behavior, Anatar-sama, I was caught off guard by your arrival. Suddenly she heard a small chuckle and she looked up to see him smiling. No need for the formalities, milady, I am not one for them, Anatar will do just fine. She smiled at this. He was certainly a gentleman to her, unlike others among the village. May I ask what brings you here to see me? Surely not to just see a kunoichi practice her abilities, she told him. He smiled, smart and beautiful. She blushed at this slightly. You are correct, I wish to grant you this gift. He handed her the ring. She looked at it and was mesmerized. The detail was amazing and she could tell it wasn't just the looks that enchanted her. She could feel power resonating from it. She then looked up at him as he explained the power of the ring, to which she gladly accepts. I thank you very much for this gift, and should you need me, I will be happy to help. Anatar smiled softly before bowing. I thank you very much, Nico-chan. Looking up, he saw a very deep blush on her face and could only smile wider. Upon blushing, however, she noticed something. Her tenant was silent. Whenever she was thinking about a guy, Matatabi never missed out on an opportunity to mess with her. So why was she quiet now? Unless she was napping. Why, you're welcome, Anatar-san, she said, smiling softly. Anatar then stood to his full height. While I must be off, I wish you a pleasant day, milady. He then took her hand and kissed it before departing. It took her a moment to snap out of her trance, and after a moment of thought she decided to visit the Reikage to see what he knew of this man. Reikage's office. The woman walked forward and stood before her leader. Oh, hello Yujito, what brings you here? A asked of her. She tried to keep a professional attitude about her, though knew her big brother was most likely going to figure it out. Sir, I was wondering what we know of Anatar-san, she asked. and immediately saw through it and waved a hand. In an instant the ANBU were gone. So, has the Lord of Gifts left with something after all? He teased her. Of course she blushes. What? She sputters out, and no. I'm just curious about this man who only appeared a few years ago. I see, said with a knowing smile. Well, here is what we do know. And he handed her a folder. She took it and opened it. He doesn't exist until 3 years ago. She looked up wide-eyed. That's correct, he told her. That's not possible. For someone of his skill and stature he should be known in every village. Yujido told him. And yet aside from birth and title, there is no record of any of his doings except for up to 3 years ago. Told her. How is this possible? She contemplated. Perhaps our curious cat should investigate this further, he asked. She looked up at him, then the photo. Matatabi. She whispered. MHM? What is it, kitten? She asked. The great cat stretched inside her vessel's mind. Do you know anything about this guy? The cat looked through her eyes, they slowly widened. Master, she asked in shock. Matatabi, did you just say dash? She was cut off. We have to find him, kitten. What does she say? Asked Day, she about to answer when. No. Say nothing. Ask if you can go searching for him, Matabi stated told her. Curious since the cat never interfered in this way before, she complied. I'm not sure. She says we should investigate and frankly, I agree. I thought about it for a brief moment. Very well, I will allow it. This is a spy mission only, Yujido. You are free to face the target as you see fit, but you are not to engage. We don't even know where his village is. She nodded before disappearing. On the road. Anatar walked along, his hood raised against the downpour. He walked out of the sight of the cloud village before preparing a black portal to only he knew where. Suddenly he paused. His pursuers stiffened, fearing they had been seen, but that faded away when they saw him walk through the portal. Little did Yujido that just before she gave chase, Anatar had a small smirk as he sensed who was following. Chapter 3, Peace or Doom? Anatar was walking the battle-scarred land on the hidden mist. There were so many signs of death and destruction. And the Lord of Gifts could see each and every one, the scent of blood, the tracks that were across the ground, the signs of jutsus and weapons used. He saw each use of destruction and death as if he were standing in the center of the battle himself. That was the difference between him and Morgoth. Where Morgoth had superior strength and power, Sauron had his wits and intelligence, not only on the battlefield, but off as well. How else would he have had 2 ages with the title of Dark Lord when his previous master only had 1? Where arrogance kept Morgoth at his current power level, he found more and more ways to increase his strength. Now he had one last place to go to in order to claim his power, and in order to do that, he required the power from the Three Tails. To do that he needed to face the Mizukage. And to do that, he needed to end the civil war. He slowly walked to the entrance of the hidden mist, already finding that it had been melted away by lava. Interesting. He said to himself as he stepped forward. Slowly his armor began to form around him till he was donned in the same black armor and hood that once belonged to his black hand, now it would be his lesser form. His black cape dragged across the ground behind him as he walked. He knew that the moment he donned the armor and used his powers, those in the Undying Lands would feel something amiss in the mortal lands, and would come send someone to investigate. But he had to handle things one at a time. He walked over bodies, some not even recognizable any longer, following the sounds of battle until he came upon the destroyed town square, where the Mizukage and a woman with long red hair in a blue battle dress were doing battle, along with hundreds of other shinobi. With a quick look over, he observed the emblems on the shoulders of those that were on the side of the rebellion. To his surprise and amusement, they were that of the Whirlpool village. Probably since they fought to the last man and they decided they would do the same. An ancient enemy. It was then all heard footsteps of a figure wearing metallic armor. When they looked to the source, many looked on in fear. Standing before them was an imposing figure in black armor that looked as if there were no weakness to the overlapping plates. The black ragged cape flowed to the side of him, and the hood concealed his upper visage. Only 2 eyes that were slitted and appeared to be fire were seen, and a slight grin filled with razor teeth. Who are you? Identify yourself, ordered the Mizukage, ignoring his former opponent. I take orders from No Man, the black-hooded, armored figure answered, his voice filled with such authority and malice that all felt the urge to kneel right then and there. He slowly began walking forward to the battle scene, straight to the Mizukage, before the young man stepped forth, his eyes now glowing blue. I order you to reveal your true name, he shouted. This made the hand however stop in his tracks. Not out of fear of the Mizukage, but shock of the one controlling him, for who else could brand others with a glowing white palm strike? The bright lord, Celebrimbor. He now knew he had no choice, that meddlesome elf was stirring up trouble again, never before had been regretted a decision more than he did now. Now would have to reveal his powers in order to free him of the fool's influence. And if it truly existed, it would reveal Celebrimbor's ring of power, thus triggering his own timer before those in the Undying Lands discover of the impending danger. But there was something else he knew that would happen. I am your liberator, slave of Celebrimbor. The young man stared the other down with shock in his eyes. Few know of him beside myself and others who serve him. Indeed, I am the Black Hand, he declared as he stepped forth, his armored boots making metallic steps. As the small bit of power he was able to regain so far was unleashed, everyone in the Undying Lands sensed his power, weaker than the past, and so they suspected it was Celebrimbor making his move. Sauron knew this and was in fact relying upon it, a dark smirk appearing upon his visage. Kill him, he ordered. Suddenly several mist ANBU appeared and attacked. The Black Hand grabbed the blade of the first ANBU and snapped it in two. Said ANBU could only watch in shock before he was kicked back and sent flying into a wall. Another ANBU charged from behind only for the Black Hand to swing his longsword behind him and slice into the shinobi, killing him. Another mist ninja began to do Hansigns, water style, water dragon jutsu, and sure enough a huge water dragon emerged and attacked the black armored figure. But then they were faced with a fire erupting from the Black Hand that evaporated the water before it even got close. They all looked at the dark figure with total terror on their visage. He's not human, shouted one of the mist shinobi. All the rebels could only watch in awe at this figure who was toying with their ANBU level shinobi. 5 then decided to charge at once and a pulse of shadows and flames expanded from his armor. The hooded gaze looked into the eyes of the mist Kage and watched at how just after he became Kage, he was trapped in a slave brand, forcing him against his will through manipulation. Learning all he needed to know, the Black Hand threw him to the ground and aimed his power at the man. Shadow and flame engulfed them both to the point that all thought he was dead. But slowly but surely, he was not only unharmed, but he now had a visage of free will and horror at his actions. "Oh Kami, what have I done?" he shouted to the sky as he fell to his knees. "I have freed you from his curse, you will pay penance by protecting this village with your very life should it need be," he declared. "Why yes, I will." He looked up to see a black armored hand revealing a ring with the image of an emerald turtle. The former Mizukage took it and put it on. "I swear by this ring that I will defend all of the hidden mist." The hand nodded before the armor began to fade away, revealing the man in the white robes from earlier. Everyone could only stare at this one individual who had appeared and ending the civil war with a single battle. They looked at the man who apparently was panting heavily. They then realized that the form he was in must take its toll. "Excuse me," spoke the woman in the blue battle dress, "but now that you have defeated him, but what do you plan to do now?" The white-robed and hooded figure spoke up. "Now, I prepare for war. It is coming and all of the Jinchuriki are now protected from the Akatsuki. My plans are in place and now all that is needed is to wait for the proper moment." He seemed focused, she could see it in his eyes, he was easily a man on a mission. But still, to do what he just did and then leave. Just like that? "No plunder, no demands, nothing?" she asked. "None, just that if you can, you might help when I need it," he told her, and she could tell that it truly was a request. She could say yes or no as she pleased. "I am May Terumi, and so long as we are available, I will be glad to help in any way we can, Lord Sauron," she said, bowing to him. He looked at her in surprise that she had seen what he truly was. The man raised her chin, which caused her to stand tall once more. "Please do not call me that aloud. If some were to hear that name they would not rest until I was no more," he told her. She nodded, understanding that some things are best kept quiet. As the man departed for home, the hidden mist silently pledged allegiance to the Dark Lord Sauron, to be at his beck and call should he need them, but also swore to never speak his name to an outsider. Chapter 4, The Hunt for a Brother continues. The sister of the hero of the Hidden Leaf, the ANBU known as Vixen, dashed through the trees as she hunted down another lead as to the location of her brother, Naruto Uzumaki. Since his disappearance, she had upped her training to insane levels both physically and mentally. She soon surpassed expectations of many as she rose through the ranks. What few knew, however, was that she was getting help in her training from Kurama, otherwise known as the Ninetales. He told her that it was most likely impossible to avenge her brother as the most likely suspect was dead, but she refused to believe, and so she demanded he help her. Impressed by her bravery and determination, he did indeed chose to teach her. He also helped her to hunt down every single lead to the whereabouts of her brother. This now brought her to the hidden mist. Her crimson hair had a genjutsu to make it black as night. As she appeared before the new Mizuki, the mist ninja didn't stand a chance as she rendered them all unconscious. "You realize that this could mean war between our nations?" asked Mei, her body seemingly relaxed but ready to move in an instant. "I do not come for war, but for answers. Rumors of a single man ending your civil war spreads throughout the nations. I want his name," she told him. "Why?" "So, you can recruit him?" "That man has his own agenda. I know not his name," she told the ANBU. Not to recruit him, she took off her mask and her hair became crimson, but to find the one who killed my brother. He has saved many people from war and death, not just our own people, but others as well. This being who saved you might know about who killed my brother. Mei's eyes widened. Standing before her was the sister of Naruto Uzumaki. She had heard of the girl's drive to find her beloved brother's murderers. "No wonder you took my shinobi down so easily." The young woman of 15 did not respond to the compliment, only spoke pleadingly, "Please, if there is anything you can give me, I will greatly appreciate it." Mei saw the desperation in the woman's eyes. Shortly after she relented, "I don't know about your brother," but the man was seen heading in the direction of the ruins of Uzugakure. The young woman bowed. "Thank you so much." She turned to leave, but heard the Mizuki speak. "I would be wary when you face him, he is not one to be trifled with," she warned her fellow redhead. The teen raised the vixen mask to her face, her hair becoming black as night once more. "Neither am I," she responded, before vanishing. Unknown location. Adatar materialized out of the portal to darkness, showing an exhausted individual before what appeared to be smoke rising from his body before it all materialized and the body he once inhabited fell to the ground as a husk. A wheezing was heard from the shadow as its existence fluttered for a moment before pure willpower brought it back to stability. "I must find a way to take physical form, I and my kin," he said as he watched the restless spirits of the Uzumaki walk around the ruins of their home. Being a spirit himself, he could see and communicate with them. He heard of their stories, their pasts. Men, women, and children alike all walked here as spirits, unable to let go after their untimely deaths one way or another. He now floated along the path to the center of the village. This would be his temporary place of residence until he had the power to raise Mordor from the ocean once more. It was ironic that the land of Uzugakure was the location of the location formerly known as Isengard. The pits were the cause of all the whirlpools that now surrounded the once great city. Even the Black Tower of Orthanc was still standing. He looked upon it and thought of his past. Facing Sauron and the White Council for the first time, how foolish they were to allow one of them to contest him. He now had all the knowledge the White Wizard possessed, how to create the greatest soldiers of the darkness, the mighty Uruk-hai. He first had to resurrect his people and bring his body in order to resurrect himself. His power was returning, thanks to the rings extracting his power and sending it to him. But while his power was returning, it was still drastically low, and apparently Celebrimbor had grown stronger thanks to his ring of power. However, he knew how to at least begin the process, the Edo Tensei Jutsu, the ability to summon the dead. The question now, was he ready to face the truth, see his old home? The people who betrayed him, killed him. The ruins of Uzugakure shook with his rage. Calming his spirit, he settled himself for the challenge to come. Chapter 5, The Shadow Looms Over the Tree. As the night came, the sky was filled with the light of the stars. It truly was a beautiful sight to witness. The ninja of Konoha were some of the few who were witnessing this beautiful sight, though their minds were not on the sky. It was on their friend who had died 2 years ago. They remembered that fateful day all too well. Flashback 7 years. In a surprising turn of events, it was actually Naruto that the Akatsuki had come for first. All 9 of them marched upon Konoha in an act of strength. All of Konoha knew they were on their way, knowing that he had no choice. Naruto at the time was away, but the Akatsuki did not know this, only that the 9 tails originated from there. It was a bloodbath. Pain himself soon wiped out the whole village. The despair filled the survivors. It was then that a cry for a savior rang out. "Naruto, hurry, please, Naruto," screamed Sakura. And literally in that instant Naruto Uzumaki himself appeared, and upon seeing what happened to his village, he gave the Akatsuki no quarter. The power that Naruto had displayed to the group from the training he had learned from his many teachers was terrifying. He faced all of the Akatsuki without even using the 9 tails chakra. The pure dedication he held to his village was shown as he took them all on. It was shocking to see the demon child risking his life to take one 9S rank ninja. By the time the battle was over, none of the Akatsuki had truly fallen, but they were all severely beaten. Their weapons were strewn across the battlefield, limbs and blood covered the landscape. Shattered masks were there as well. The last to stand was the final pain. It was then that Naruto hit his limit and the final pain was able to pin him while the rest had been forced to retreat. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Hinata, Natsumi, and Sakura had appeared and attempted to fight off pain, however all three of them utilizing his powers to full extent since he did not need them alive. It was then that Naruto unleashed the Nine-Tails power and went on a rampage. He snapped out of it at the last moment and defeated him as Naruto. Shortly after his defeat of Pain, everyone resurrected had waited for their hero to return. Kakashi had rushed out to find his student, the others had waited behind to prepare a great welcome home. Some were awaiting him more than others, his friends especially were excited. "How do you think that knucklehead pulled it off?" asked Kiba. "I honestly don't know, but whatever he did is beyond amazing," responded Shuji, "all this destruction and not a single casualty." "Hinata, how are you feeling?" asked Sakura of the recently impaled woman. They had been able to save her, but it had been close. I am fine now, thank you, Sakura," she said smiling, though she and Sakura both felt something terrible was still going to happen. "That's my big brother for you." They all turned to see Natuto's younger sister Natsumi standing with them. She had fought alongside her brother since both of them had gone to Mount Mayaboku to learn the sage arts. Though when she and Hinata had been knocked unconscious, Naruto had gone into a rage and throttled Pain and continued their battle outside the ruins of the village. "He never gives up," she said with pride. She may be a Jinchuriki like her brother, but he had always protected her. None knew of her status but the Hokage herself. She and her brother's friends all waited patiently to see their friend return. Naruto OST despair. However, their celebrations were cut short when Natsumi's eyes widened in pain and shock. She dropped to a knee as she gripped her gut. Her friends all looked at her with worry and ran to check on her. "Natsumi, are you okay?" "What's WR? Sakura lost her words when she saw the look of pure horror on her face. "Hinata, Niji, use your Byakugan, look for Naruto please," she said beggingly. Without question they did so, and what they saw made their blood run cold. "No! Naruto kun!" Hinata screamed, running to the tree line. Natsumi ran after her with the same thoughts in mind. "Lady Hinata!" Niji ran after her. The others did so out of concern from Hinata's outburst, but they didn't have to wait long. Out from under the trees emerged Kakashi, his head low, and in his arms was a body covered in a white tarp, though it was drenched in blood, particularly along the neckline. When he saw them running to him, he dropped to a knee and lowered the body to the ground. "PP please, dear Kami, no," muttered Hinata. She slowly unwrapped the tarp to see Naruto's body covered in blood. His eyes were opened in shock and betrayal, tears mingled with the blood. Whatever had caused his death was neither from battle nor from someone unknown to him. The look in his eyes would haunt them for the next 7 years, the eyes of one betrayed by those he trusted the most. "No!" screamed Sakura. She dropped to Naruto's side, trying to examine and maybe heal him. But the moment she tried, his head rolled to the side, away from his body. Many of Konoha 12 wretched at seeing this sight. To see Naruto so battered and bloody, not to mention dead, was unbelievable. And they had heard from Ino and Shikamaru's fathers that he was a little bruised, but not anywhere near the state he was in now. "Did Pain do this?" asked Natsumi of Kakashi. He shook his head. "No, I watched Conan leave with his bodies. He began, the next thing I knew I was knocked out, and when I came to, I heard the sounds of battle. When I got there, I found him, like this." Everyone could only wonder, if not Pain, and not the Akatsuki, then who? End flashback. It was with this that everyone's lives drastically changed. Every single member of the Konoha 12 joined the ANBU Black Ops in order to become as strong as they possibly could. Their minds and bodies were pushed to their very limits, some of their personalities changed. 2 examples would be Hinata and Natsumi, both of whom were once kind and gentle. But upon Naruto's death, they saw it as proof of their weakness, and so they became battle-hardened. They became more outgoing but also more aggressive. Sakura couldn't help but picture the Hinata from the illusionary world. Because now that's exactly what the both of them were. That was a frightening experience itself. When she and Natsumi had been sent there, they had been forced to fight the alternate realities version of Naruto. It became a traumatizing experience seeing the man who had saved their lives now trying to kill them. Currently they were off duty, but had chosen to rest atop the Hokage monument, where their friend once had. Natsumi was the only one unaccounted for as she was on a solo mission. The remaining 10 were all thinking about the times the blonde idiot had impacted their lives, be it humility, choosing one's own destiny, or just being something to aim for. He had been an impact on their lives. However, their break was cut short when the alarms went off in the Hokage's office. The group all rushed in to see something. Before them was a massive shadow that it seemed no light could pierce through. It was within the Hokage's vault, and now everything in there was gone. At first, they thought the shadow was merely an after effect of the thief, but then the shadow turned to them. It took the form of a tall human but shrouded a black mist that seemed to roll of him, hiding all detail. "Ah, the infamous ANBU of the Hidden Leaf," a demonic voice spoke. This sent a shiver down their spine that not even the Ninetales could inspire. "And here I thought I would have more time. No matter, I have what I came for." "Kai," the ANBU all shouted, thinking it a genjutsu. When nothing happened, they were confused, but not off guard. "Who are you?" shouted the ANBU Hondo, pulling out his ninjato. "Reveal yourself." "Oh, if only it were that easy, Mutt, but don't worry, you'll see me soon enough." The shadow blasted them back with powerful force. It shocked them because there was neither a chakra spike nor any other indication. QB released OST. A snarl was heard in each of their mind as the image of a flaming lidless eye staring into their very souls. As they were caught off guard, shadowy tendrils smashed against each of them and they were embedded into the walls. By the time they cleared their heads, the shadow had already flown out into the night. "Follow it," screamed Falcon. With that, the group chased after the shadow, or at least to the edge of the village. There they saw something that made their blood freeze and then boil. Someone, without anyone ever noticing, had decapitated the head of the statue, as if reminding the village how their hero fell. Gashes and slashes covered the figure as if it were how they found the real body 2 years ago. "Whoever did this is going to pay," shouted Dove. "We'll find them, Dove," Slug assured her fellow ANBU, "but we need to find out what happened here first." However, they didn't notice the shadow had not left yet till they departed. It had witnessed their reaction and admittedly was puzzled, but not enough to curb its wrath. Back at Uzagakure Ruins. Batman Begins OST Barbastella. When Sauron returned to the ruins, he felt a familiar signature, and for the first time in a long time he felt his heart lighten, but then he remembered what his killers had told him would be her fate. Deciding to keep his illusions and genjutsu, he watched her as she traveled the ruins. She brushed a hand across the walls and pillars of her ancestral home, imagining her people doing their daily duties. Children running past her, ninja running across rooftops on their way to complete a mission. A tear slid down her face as she thought of how the great village had fallen in the Third Great Ninja War. From what she could discover, for every ninja that fell from Yuzu, 20 fell from their killers. To be from such incredible warriors, she could understand why her brother had accomplished all he had before his untimely end by cowards who waited for his chakra and body to become exhausted. "Brother, are you watching?" she asked. Little did she know the truth. This was our ancestral home. Some of the greatest warriors lived here. It fills me with pride. Eventually she reached the center of the ruins, where a structure that had her in awe, a great tower, as black as night and taller than anything she had seen in her life. It took a long time, but she finally reached the top of the tower, looking out over the entire village. When she turned to face the center, she saw an orb as black as night. Around it were symbols and letters written in flames. She could not read them, as some were Fuinjutsu, and others were from a language she did not recognize. But she could see what the effect was. Whatever the orb was, it was drawing in power. She walked toward the orb with intent to grasp it, but when her hand was an inch away, Pain's theme. Within her mind appeared a great eye wreathed in flames. The pupil was a slit similar to Kurama's own, though far more terrifying. With the vision came a snarling growl that frightened her. Quickly she yanked her hand away. "Who enters my domain?" asked a ghostly voice. She turned to see a man in kage robes with the spiral of yuzu upon the hat. However, Natsumi's eyes widened in horror as she took a proper look at his appearance. His whole appearance was an eerie white. She could see past him, and his robes were tattered and decayed. She was looking upon a spirit of the dead. I am so sorry, I was just following a lead," she said, not quite believing what she was seeing. "The dead do not suffer the living to pass," he said menacingly. Instantly more figures appeared around the top of the tower. All wearing ANBU Black Ops uniforms, though like the Kage before her, their armor was worn by time and blade appeared to have rusted over. Quickly she drew her own blade. "I did not intend to intrude upon your resting place, great warriors of the hidden maelstrom. If you allow, I shall depart instantly." "None can enter Yuzu but our kin," he said as he drew his own blade and advanced on his foe, swinging his blade to cleave her in two, only for it to be blocked by her own blade. To say the ghosts were shocked was an understatement, because the next thing that was said, the line was snuffed out, he roared, only to receive a kick that sent him flying back. The spark has burst into flame once more, she snarled. She expected another attack only to receive none. That is enough, Himura, said a frightening demonic voice. She turned around to see a shadow floating behind her. She jumped back to a safer distance to see a Kage kneeling before the shadowing being, and if a Kage did, everyone else better damn well do the same. Sure enough, the ANBU and all other rotting ghosts were all kneeling as well. Seems like this little vixen is more than she appears, the voice spoke. She raised her blade. Fear not, dear, I do not wish to kill my kin. She was shocked. This demonic being was an Uzumaki? Correct, dear, I am indeed one of your blood, closer than you might think. In fact, he told her. She lowered the blade slightly, though she certainly didn't let her guard down. Who are you? Asked Vixen. My name is long gone, forgotten over the years, but allow me to introduce me with my new name. I am Sauron. Something about that name demanded respect as well as fear. She looked at the shadow with question. What are you? That is a very long story that I do not have time today, she growled at that. However, I can gladly answer your real question. Her eyes widened. Had it really been that easy? Who killed my brother? She asked. Please, it is what I have been looking for the last 2 years. The greatest of the 9 knows of what transpired. Speak to him. I know that since your brother's fall you have not spoken to the demon, Sauron told her. Isn't that right, Kurama? With that she somehow found herself outside Konoha after a flash of fire. Her eyes widened as she was forcefully pulled into her mindscape. She turned to see the cage and it certainly frightened her. The beast was now 3 times as tall, a vicious grin upon his face. Somebody certainly got bigger, she quipped, trying to keep a brave face. Brave? Even in the face of my prime you still are just as brave, just like your parents, and your brother, Kurama responded. She was indeed frightened, but she was far more interested in finding the truth. Who killed my brother? I know you have both halves back, and that means you have your memories with him as well. What happened to him? The great beast let out a growling sigh. I will show you, but know that not everything is as it appears. You must look underneath what your eyes see. In an instant her eyes glowed white and she watched from the sidelines the death of her brother. Memory. Naruto was exhausted, recovering slowly from his battle but not properly unless he got some good rest. It was then that Natsumi saw something that she could never believe. The Konoha 11 were attacking their friend, their eyes glowing a pale blue as they did so. "Why?" asked Naruto as he coughed up blood, the look of the betrayed on his face. Because you are a monster, and we are going to put you down, said Shikamaru. Do not worry, Naruto, your sister will be well taken care of, said Danzo, who had appeared. The way he said it though made his perverted and demented thoughts rather obvious. Hinata then walked forward and raised a palm. Naruto looked up at her. Hinata, why? You said you loved me. That was to catch you off guard so I could do this, demon, she screamed as she slammed a palm to his chest, destroying his heart, in more ways than one. Sai then unsheathed his blade and in one fell swoop decapitated the blonde. As his head fell from his body, Natsumi wailed in horror and denial as she saw their friends kill her brother. It was then that the vision ended and she awoke outside of the Leaf Village. Her mask had fallen from her face, and as she got to her hands and knees, tears fell from her eyes as the closest people in her life were revealed to have destroyed her brother. Not only that, but who knows what they have planned for her. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't pleasant. She moved her crimson hair out of the way as she heard rushing footsteps, quickly putting her mask back on. She turned to see sure enough that it was her friends that had arrived. She got herself into her ANBU behavior and acted like nothing happened. Are you alright, Vixen? Asked Deer. We saw the flash of darkness and thought we were under attack. Yeah, I'm fine, Captain, she said with no emotion. This was slightly unusual as even as an ANBU she was livelier than the others. What happened? Was your mission a success? Slug asked her friend. Negative, I thought I had a lead, but it turned out to be a dead end, Vixen responded. The others cursed under their breaths. Damn it, snarled Hound, now we have no leads. Vixen thought about what she had just heard. He sounded so sincere. Was the vision she had seen false? No, it was real, she knew that much, but why did they kill him? At this point what she did know was that they did, and they would pay dearly for their crime against her brother. It was then that she looked upon the statue of her brother, to see it destroyed. Who did this? Vixen demanded, rushing to the deformed statue. She turned to look at her friends only for them to shake their heads. We don't know, honestly, Dove told her. Vixen looked over at her blonde friend. The two females locked eyes for a short moment. Vixen then removed her gaze to look upon the statue and the plaque underneath. In honor of our hero. The man who died so that all else may live. A true follower of the will of fire. Naruto Uzumaki. Chapter 6, Confrontation. Natsumi focused on what Tsunade had ordered of her. Apparently, she was going to work with the 8 Tails Jinchuriki in order to learn to control the 9 Tails. And she wasn't the only one, even the other Jinchuriki were going to be there. Somehow, despite having been extracted, half of the tailed beasts remained with their hosts. This would allow them to connect with one another and prepare for the battle ahead. She had taken her training there seriously, and upon finishing she came back, despite everyone arguing the fact. At this point, the amount of power she commanded was only rivaled by the more refined skill of B, and he was in total agreement as her. The truth, however, is that the vision had haunted her day and night. She needed answers now. And her mother and father, who they both had been there to help her deal with the 9 Tails, had encouraged her to find answers, as it was their beloved son and her brother who had been cut down. Now she, alongside her friends, were headed for their place atop the Hokage monument. Little did they know that she had prepared a trap. Bombs and traps were set to restrain them until she could get proper answers. Sure enough, when they got up there, boom! Run! We're under attack. Sakura had actually thrown her to safety. She hit the ground and looked on with abject horror as they were all restrained, sometimes painfully, such as in Hinata and Sai's cases, by the traps that sprang to life. When the deed had been done, not even Sakura's enhanced strength could break out, as the seals and materials used were chakra draining. When everyone looked at her, they saw the horrified look shift to one of a cold-blooded killer. Pain's theme. Now that I have your attention, she said coldly. Her friends looked up to see absolute shock and horror on their faces. Natsumi, what the hell is going on? Barked Kiba. The others were with the same mindset. Oh, don't worry, you'll be released if you answer properly, Natsumi said. Her eyes were crimson and slitted. Those eyes. Sakura uttered in shock, you're a Jinchuriki? The others' eyes widened in further shock, before looking at their captor. Indeed, I am. I held half of the 9 Tails, just like my brother, who you murdered, she snarled. To hear such an accusation from their friend, the sister of their hero, it was heartbreaking. Why you think we could kill Naruto? Asked Ino, her face showing her disbelief. I am the one asking questions. Now, the 9 Tails is now fully powered within me, and he showed me the memory of his other half from Naruto. It showed all of you, beating Naruto down within an inch of his life, before telling him y'all were going to use me, then you cut off his head, she roared. Her fangs were now elongated, her nails now claw. She looks like a beautiful, yet frightening demoness, and they couldn't help but be afraid. How dare you, screamed Hinata. This actually caught Natsumi off guard. She had watched Hinata change, just like herself, but now she was showing her own rage. How dare you accuse us, me, of harming the one man I ever loved? Hinata continued to scream. I would never lay a hand on him to harm him. I fought and nearly died to protect him from pain. Why would I ever put myself in his way if I didn't love your brother? Then how did you explain what I saw? Natsumi roared back. I watched as you all beat him, crushed his soul, and deprived it of all hope. It was you who shoved your palm into his chest and destroyed his heart after calling him a demon. Natsumi, roared the great beast from within her mind. Her eyes glazed over as she was pulled into her mindscape. The others wondered what exactly had happened to her, that is, except for Sakura. She was pulled into her mind by the fox, she told them. They all looked at her confused. I've seen it when Naruto used to before he died. Why would she believe we killed her brother anyway? Asked Chuji. It makes no sense. I don't know, but she was beyond angry. Whatever happened while she was gone, she truly believes we did it, Shikamaru answered. But what could have possibly? You don't think it has to do with the 9 Tails, do you? Tenten asked. She did say that she was shown a memory, Niji mentioned. Perhaps there was a nightmare? No, she's had plenty of those. She never grew vengeful from them, Ino said. I've helped her to deal with the stress. Inside Natsumi's mind. Natsumi was now enraged. The fox had stopped her from getting justice. After 2 years she was on the verge. Now the stupid fox was in the way. Damn it, Kurama, why did you stop me? She screamed. The fox snarled at the human. Watch how you speak to me, human, he roared, or I'll rip my way out of the seal. I pulled you in here because they are telling the truth. Particularly the princess. I can read negative emotions, and when one lies, and they are innocent. Then explain what you showed me, she screamed. How can what I saw not be them? I don't know. While it was their chakra signatures, their minds were not active, like they were under a genjutsu. Kurama answered her. A genjutsu, why didn't you say so earlier, she screamed. I would have had I known you would not be able to control yourself, you were on the verge of killing them, he roared back, his tail swishing around angrily. What are you getting at? Danzo controlled them somehow? Natsumi asked. The great fox shook his head. No, even he was not in his right mind, an outside source was affecting him. He answered, I'm saying that at the very least they do not know they did it, therefore are not responsible. Hinata was right, they would never hurt their friend, not intentionally. Natsumi let out a gentle sigh before looking at the fox, you better be right. As she vanished, Kurama was deep in thought. I have not seen this power since that blasted ranger was possessed by the elf lord, and since then it was a power similar to his, yet greatly increased due to something. Madara Uchiha had a mind-penetrating power so similar to Master it was discomforting, probably why I hate the Uchiha so much. If only Master had not been destroyed by that infernal hobbit. Reality. It was then that Natsumi came out of her mindscape and let out a slow sigh. Her eyes reopened to show they had returned to their cerulean blue. Everyone watched with bated breath as she thought about what was to be done. It was at this moment that she knew she would have to lie for the sake of her friends, otherwise they would be broken beyond repair. With a flick of a few kunai the traps were all undone. I don't know how, but the Ninetales said it wasn't you, Natsumi told them. He apparently can read negative emotions and lies, and you had neither. Damn straight it wasn't us. Kiba barked, however he was stopped by Hinata. When everyone looked at her, it was like how she used to be, the kind and gentle princess. She walked up to Natsumi and grabbed her in a hug. We will find out who truly killed Naruto-kun, and like your brother, I never go back on my word, she assured her, that about me shall never change. Natsumi, with tears in her eyes, nodded as she grabbed her friend into a hug and sobbed. Chapter 7, The White Counsel. In Yuzu Naruto OST, Orochimaru theme. Sauron was deep in thought, the reanimation jutsu. It was perfect as a start, but he needed a full resurrection for his people, not an imperfect sham. Therefore, he began to work on fixing the process and making it full. Were he full power he'd be able to bring them back himself, but he was still a shadow, it wouldn't be long though. But he knew exactly who he'd be returning to the land of the living in order to perfect the jutsu. 3 of the greatest seal masters in Konoha's history. With his own will he pictured the signs in his mind before speaking calmly in his dark voice, Edo Tense no Jutsu. In an instant 2 coffins appeared without hesitation, ripping out of the ground like a man coming up for a breath after a long swim. The third however was still bound by the Shinigami, so he had to let that wait. The first 2 opened to reveal the darkened forms of Kushina and Mito Uzumaki. He didn't wake them yet, he let them go back to their rest a little longer. Looking into his power reserves, he couldn't take on his true form yet, but he was surprised to see that there was a form that he could take, one he had not had in many an age. Looking up into the night sky, he saw the moon and grinned. It has been too long since I have been on a good hunt. On the shores of the land of waves. A beautiful white boat the likes of which hadn't been seen since the Third Age gently came onto the shore. Once there the passengers all disembarked. The elven rulers Elrond and Galadriel came to the shore first. The Lady of Light wore a dress as white as snow that seemed to flow behind her, never catching a single bit of filth of dirt. Her beautiful golden locks of hair flowed in the ocean breeze, and on her head was a gorgeous circlet, and on her right hand was her ring of power. The Lord of Rivendell wore the most impressive armor that had ever been seen. Its silver strokes on its brown armor were a thing of beauty as well as that of strength. On his hip he wielded his elvish blade, on his head he too wore a circlet, and like his elvish companion, wore a ring of power. The next to step off the boat was an old man completely dressed in white robes and cloak. He had a staff that was made of white wood and his hair and beard was also white. He was known as Mithrandir, the White Rider, or to those who knew him well, he was known simply as Gandalf. Middle-earth has changed greatly since our time, Elrond said to his company. Indeed, it has, my old friend, some for the better, and some for the worse, Gandalf said with a warm tone that changed into that of sorrow. War has plagued the land of men for many ages since we left, Galadriel said, and if we cannot accomplish what we came to do, this entire continent, followed by our own, will burn. Months later. Of all the people who had searched for Naruto's killers, none had looked harder than the 4 women whom he had such an impact on, Natsumi, Sakura, Hinata, and surprisingly Ino. The final member of the group was the surprise. In fact none but the other 3 women knew that Ino did indeed have a connection to the blonde-haired knucklehead. Apparently, he had saved her from a fate worse than death at some point and had helped her recover from the traumatic experience. As such, she grew to admire the blonde as she got to know the real Naruto Uzumaki. The four women had actually used this as a medium to become great friends, and usually went on the missions to find Naruto together, becoming sisters. They supported one another in their grief and grew to become quite the team. While their fighting styles differed drastically, it turned out that putting them together made possibly one of the greatest combinations in combat alongside the Inoshikacho formation. They became so skilled they became the deadly flowers of the hidden leaf. It was actually these four women who found a strange group on horseback. All three of them wore strange cloaks and hoods of different color and design, all of them seeming to be incredibly expensive. "Children, why do you follow us from the shadows?" a woman in a beautifully designed white cloak and hood spoke out for them to hear. The two women were shocked, to say the least. They were four of the best that the Leaf Village had to offer when it came to kunoichi. How did these women sense them? They landed before the travelers in their fighting stances. "Who are you and why are you in the land of fire?" Sakura demanded, her eyes hard and her senses on alert. One of the hooded figures, this one black with silver designs throughout it, looked to another, this one with an elegant black cloak and hood. "Looks like we were right, we have made it to the land of fire." This voice was male, it was smooth, elegant, but at the same time filled with authority, power, and wisdom. The other nodded, then looked to the three teens. "Why do four children of men already have years of experience in battle?" This voice too had an air of elegance and strength, but this was much older, and had wisdom even further than them. This further shocked the kunoichi. "Children of men, what did he mean by that, and do they not know of shinobi?" "We are kunoichi, ninja of the village hidden in the leaves, and you are nearing our homeland, identify yourselves." This time it was Hinata to speak. Though they weren't in ANBU uniform, she lost none of her lethality. It was then the one leading the company lowered his white hood, revealing an old white-haired and bearded man. "I am sorry if we are intruding, my dear ladies. My name is Gandalf, these are my two companions. We actually are trying to get to your village, but we are unfamiliar with this land and have been attempting to make our way there," Gandalf explained to the four young women. The name sounded so familiar. Where had they heard that name before? "Are you seeking our village's help in a matter, Gandalf-san?" Natsumi asked politely, though not letting her guard down quite yet. "Actually, we were hoping to be of assistance to you, if you would allow us, that is," he said kindly. This confused the kunoichi, but they nevertheless lowered their guard. "We would have to take you to the Hokage, our village leader, for that decision to be made, though if what you say is true then I doubt she would turn you down." Sakura answered them, "Please allow us to guide you there." "I do thank you for your courteousness, my fair ladies." The old man smiled kindly, and, unlike another old white-haired man, held no lustful look in his eyes, more like those of a kind and loving grandfather. Needless to say, this helped the four women to lighten up and even smile as they escorted the company, explaining and teaching them about their culture and society, without giving too much information, of course. Midday the next day. By the time they had reached the walls of Konoha, the travelers were all too grateful to be at their destination. Apparently, it had been a long time since they had been in a comfortable bed, and the four kunoichi could relate. They had actually been heading home from a mission. When asked as to what it might be, all they said was looking for the one who killed their friend, though they all knew who the pinkette was referring to. "Revenge only leads to destruction, but justice is necessary. I'm certain your friend is looking from above and he is watching over you." The one who was known as Elrond spoke to the two girls kindly. The girls did not remember speaking of which sex their friend was, but decided to keep that to themselves. And where had they heard that name before? He too had a familiar name, but where had they heard it from? They couldn't figure that out. On their way to the Hokage Tower, they met the other teams reporting back from missions who decided to tag along since they needed to report to the Hokage anyway. When they finally reached the Hokage's office and stood before Shizune, Tsunade's first apprentice, she looked up and smiled. "Sakura. Hinata. Ino. Natsumi. How are you? Any luck?" She looked up at them hopefully, only to see their downcast faces. "Oh, I see. Well, wait, who are they?" Shizune said, noticing the large group of people, including the four children. "They wish to speak to the Hokage about helping our village somehow. We agreed to at least bring them here," Sakura answered. "Oh, well, she'll at least appreciate a break from paperwork. Go on in," Shizune said, standing up and opening the door. Past the door was a large room with seating for many and two desks. One to the side was paperwork and the second, which was set directly on the other side of the room from the door. It was in the paperwork desk the top of a blonde head could be seen. "Excuse me, Lady Tsunade?" Shizune called out. The Hokage stuck her head up over the paperwork. Yes, Shizune, what is it? She asked in an exhausted tone. I have some people who wish to speak to you, she told her, allowing the people to pass. Ah, welcome to the Leaf Village, the Hokage said in a welcoming yet businesslike manner. What can I do for you? She asked politely. Gandalf smiled. I thank you for your welcome, fair lady, he said. It is actually we who wish to be of service to you. My name is Gandalf the White, also known as Mithrandir. And these are my companions, Lord Elrond, the Lady Galadriel. Both removed their hoods respectively. Upon seeing the woman of the company, all the men in the room, Shino included, had to grab their noses fiercely so as to not be blown back by a nosebleed. The woman was absolutely gorgeous, and she had an almost angelic air about her. If you don't mind me saying, Tsunade began, you all have strange names compared to our land, but at the same time they sound so. Her eyes widened before muttering, impossible. Lady Tsunade, what's wrong? Shizune asked concerned. The other shinobi in the room were puzzled as well, but the heroes of old all had smiles on their faces. Shizune, when you were a child, do you remember the stories I used to tell you? The legends of old? Tsunade asked. Shizune nodded. Yes, the tales of the first, second, and third ages, the tales of Sauron and the Yuan ring. It was her turn for her eyes to widen. The others were still not getting it. Yeah, we have all heard the stories, our families all told us. What's your point? Ino asked. Indeed, the War of the Ring truly was a youthful story, the story of how a small being known as a hobbit destroyed the One Ring, ending the Dark Lord Sauron. Lee shouted out with his normal gusto. So what is your point? I don't see how some fairy tale has you all worked up over Lady Hokage, Kiba said cluelessly. Use your head, Kiba, she snapped. What were the names of the White Council? She barked out. About 5 seconds of silence went by, before everyone's eyes went completely wide, looking at the three of them. Another 5 seconds before the whole village could hear wwwhhhaatt. Sunset. So let me get this straight. Tsunade said, rubbing her temples, you are the heroes of the War of the Ring, which means it was all true, elves, dwarves, and wizards. She finished looking at Gandalf, all exist and have lived in the Undying Lands and the Timeless Halls across the West Ocean, am I right so far? Every shinobi there was completely shocked, confused, and in awe simultaneously. Not only did they find out the legends that they lived with as children, of times long before the Sage of Sixth Paths, before the power of chakra, they were all true, and before them were some of the greatest heroes the world had ever produced. They truly were in awe. You are correct, Lady Tsunade, all we have said is true, and I'm certain that we don't need to create further proof, am I correct? Elrond said politely. Tsunade nodded. It was then Gandalf who spoke up, his grandfatherly stance gone and not that of one with a dire situation on his hands. Now as to why we are here, I am certain that you know since we exist, so did the enemy. Gandalf spoke. Tsunade nodded, her visage showing that of worry but also as if she were preparing for the worst, and rightly so. You refer to Sauron, she asked, to which Gandalf nodded, but according to the legends, Frodo destroyed the ring and destroyed Sauron. Furthermore, all his generals and lieutenants were slain as well. At this Elrond spoke up, it is true that the enemy was destroyed, however, Aragorn had the wisdom to ask me if we perhaps missed anything or anyone. The result was truly terrifying. At this point everyone was at the edge of their seats, partially in anticipation, partially in fear. Do you remember the name Celebrimbor? The group all thought for a moment before Sakura, who was always the best at remembering information. Wasn't he the master smith who created the Rings of Power? She asked. Elrond nodded. Indeed, it was certainly a historic moment, and not for good. He and all of us were fooled by the Dark Lord's disguised form into creating them in order to have strength and willpower to govern, he told them. But he deceived us, using the knowledge he learned in the skills of all smith masters of every race and creed, and used them to make a master ring, making him the Lord of the Rings, he told them. But he was destroyed, wasn't he? Hinata asked. The group held their breath in fear that they might be wrong. Indeed, he was, Gandalf said, noticing the relieved looks across their faces, but the wraith that was Celebrimbor survived, and in the short time that he was in contact with the One, he became corrupted and foul. He now seeks dominion over all just like Sauron, but as the Bright Lord, his burning pride will consume all that he comes into contact with. In truth, he would become worse than Sauron ever could be. At this the whole group went pale. They all knew the stories of the Dark Lord, but a lord who would claim to be bright but be worse was terrifying. And he has made efforts to control the world already? Asked Tsunade. The group nodded. Gandalf was the one to answer now. Indeed, he has learned well from the defeats he suffered from Sauron. He has the power to penetrate the mind of others, forcing them to do things that they would not even remember. It matters not when they are branded either. From then on, they can be forced to do whatever he wills. In some cases, it is by twisting their minds, but there are other moments that he can force one to kill their own friend, and they won't ever remember it. In an instant everything made sense to Natsumi, her eyes wide with terror. She looked at the back of her friends as the revelation slammed down upon her like a mountain. Her mind was in terrible conflict when she suddenly heard a foreign voice in her mind, calm and gentle. It came from the elf Queen Galadriel. "Ease your mind, child, I can sense much turmoil in your mind," she said calmly to the younger woman. Natsumi's eyes shot in the direction of the woman who continued to say soothing things, with her mind. "Whatever torments you have been long on your mind, let your mind be at ease for now. I will help you when we can speak in private later." There was something, she didn't know why, but she trusted her. Celebrimbor spent much time around Sauron when he was disguised as Anatar. The two of them worked well together and got along until Celebrimbor betrayed him and gave the 3 rings to the elves, Elrond said. However, the group paled as they heard the name Anatar. "Impossible," muttered Tsunade, her eyes wide with fear, but before any could respond they all heard several things: a loud howl, followed by loud crashing sounds which were then followed by several screams. The whole group ran outside, wondering why they had heard a wolf's howl. Wolves were never a problem in Konoha, right? Akatsuki theme. Sure enough, however, it was like a plague had struck. A huge pack of wolves were rushing through the village, attacking and tearing things apart. Ninja was just now appearing to combat the unexplained wolf pack. The thing that had them concerned, however, was that these wolves were huge, larger than any they had seen. A few wolves were cut down, but the beasts worked as a team to take down several of their opponents. Eventually, the Jonin jumped in, utilizing jutsu to attack the wolves. Several more were cut down. The wolves and shinobi were in a standoff now until they heard another howl, but it was different. This one demanded order and respect. The wolves' ear all twitched, then slowly they backed up and moved out of the way. Seeing this monstrosity made the shinobi pale. The other's wolves were huge, but this one was enormous. Easily the size of a horse, this beast's coat was as black as the darkest night, glistening against the full moon. Its eyes were a bloody crimson red and they seemed to glow. These eyes showed utmost hatred and loathing, promising death to any who dared to challenge him. Akamaru, upon seeing this wolf, immediately dropped to its belly, whining uncontrollably. Kiba himself was having a hard time. His whole body, having been trained to have the senses of an animal, they were now telling him to kneel before this monstrosity before him. The others could see that he was struggling, the sweat that was coming off of him, the fact that his muscles were shaking, and the fear that was in his eyes. Even his mother, who was there, was handling herself slightly better. "Natsumi, stay out of his way." Kurama spoke up, fear evident in his voice. She grew very concerned at this. "Kurama, the 9-tailed beast, was afraid? Kiba-kun, what's wrong?" Hinata asked in concern. He could barely speak, but he managed. Alpha," he said, making the others look at the slowing walking beast. Tsum finished for him. "That wolf right there is an alpha, one far fiercer than any I have ever encountered. His very air demands respect and submission," she told the others. Even the clan leader herself had legs that looked ready to give out. However, it was now that the heroes of old walked up. "That is no ordinary wolf," Gandalf spoke up. "It is a beast that had the intelligence of a man. It's a breed greater than the dire wolves you see before you." This made them freak. Dire wolves. They were extinct. How are so many here? And if these were dire wolves, what the hell was this thing? "A werewolf," Elrond answered everyone's unspoken question. They looked closer and sure enough his upper body had the body of a man. The wolf snarled and barked as it walked closer. It was then that the werewolf howled once more, and as he did, the moon turned blood red. It was then that the other wolves all began to snarl and foam, having heard their alpha's call to battle. It was then that several shinobi decided to act preemptively and attack the werewolf, their swords drawn and raised. It was then that the werewolf's ears shot straight up and he snarled with a nasty grin. His ears shot straight up to where they looked like a devil's horns. In a quick flash he dodged the first strike, the then clamped jaws down on the ninja's arm and threw him into the second. Both soon slammed into and through the adjacent wall. The third's throat was ripped out by a swiping claw. The final ninja was hit by what could be explained as a donkey kick, which sent him into another wall. Standing back to its full height, its eyes looked around at the humans before him. Finally, those demonic eyes locked onto the one person, Natsumi Uzumaki. When their eyes met, she gasped. They held a familiarity to her, and the hatred in them seemed to vanish. The beast calmly began to walk toward her. Her heart raced in fear. She wanted to run, they all did. But then she heard a voice. Natsumi. The voice was a whisper, indiscernible, but it was there, and it was in her head. She became entranced by it. She couldn't even hear others talking to her as she stepped forward. However, the white wizard stepped before her and spoke with a voice of power. "Begone, foul beast of darkness, you shall not step further," he declared. The white wizard, however, was shocked to see shock in the wolf's eyes, which were replaced by disbelief, then unbridled fury. The horse-sized beast snarled and roared, its entire body tensing and clenched in rage. Gandalf was barely able to utilize his purifying light in order to force the beast back. The beast's front right paw was burned and whimpered as it stepped back. However, despite the pain, the werewolf placed its full weight back on all its paws. As the wolf's eyes traveled, he now saw all of the heroes of old, and when his eyes locked onto Frodo, his eyes went from recognition back to utter rage. However, seeing as he could do nothing at the moment, he merely turned and barked. The dire wolves then departed. "Follow them. Make sure they cause no more trouble," Tsunade ordered. Before they left, they all noticed a strange guttural bark-like sound coming from the werewolf. They looked on to see he was laughing. They looked on with terrified curiosity and then just plain horror as they watched the men that the werewolf had killed, changed into monsters similar to itself. The change was horrifying. The way their bodies twisted and turned were not normal. They screamed in agony, even though they should be dead. They grew fur all over their bodies of different kinds and colors. They ripped out of their clothing and their bones snapped and reformed. Soon, about 9 more werewolves were now standing beside the Black Alpha, only slightly smaller. They snarled and barked at their once friends, loyal to their new leader, their Alpha. "They are gone, taken by the bite under the blood moon," Galadriel said in horror. They had forgotten about the most terrible part of the werewolf, the bite. On a normal night you would most likely die, on a rare occasion you transformed. But during the blood moon, it was a 100% conversion rate. It was then that they realized the amused and sinister look in the Alpha's eyes. He was enjoying instilling terror upon them. In a sudden burst of speed, the werewolves all took off. Before they could give chase, though, they heard more howling. It was then that their blood froze. The dire wolves were now in the forest of death. In Yuzugakure. The alpha werewolf got back to the Yuzugakure, black mist slowly oozing off of him as he takes a bipedal form. Eventually, the beast-like figures vanished, replaced by the shadowy form of Sauron. He looked upon his concealment spells and was pleased. He was slowly gaining his strength back. For 6 ages he was slowly regaining his strength. He could feel his strength slowly returning. He was south close. It was then that he utilized a spell that would allow him to see beyond the veil he himself had placed. Within an instant he was witnessing the effects of his return. The country hidden in the maelstrom was still ruins, but it was far from abandoned. All of those who had fallen protecting Yuzu had been fully returned to life after he took Nagato's body and forced it to use the Rinne rebirth. Now the Dark Lord was no fool. He knew that shinobi alone would not be enough to fulfill his task, which is why he visited the samurai in the Land of Iron, specifically the samurai lord there. Going into the man's mind, he planted images and ideas of the shinobi being vicious villains. He also implanted the image of a new style of armor, far more menacing and vicious, more durable, and shredder armor. 2 ages ago he had begun to reconstruct his army. Orcs, Uruk-hai, trolls, and every manner of dark creature known to the world were at his command. They were all trained to the peak of strength and speed. All of them specialized in one thing or another. However, only around 50,000 Uruk-hai were here guarding the land of maelstroms. The rest were hidden in the shadows of the world, places, and only the Dark Lord knew of. He knew of some and created others with bursts of power, and soon, very soon, he would do something that would make the whole of the elemental nations tremble in fear. It was actually 2 ages ago that he had made up his mind who he would serve. And it came to him, in the form of his old master, the first Dark Lord, Morgoth. Flashback to the 7th Age, an ancient enemy. Sauron was seriously contemplating his options. He could feel his power returning. He wielded enough to reconstruct his armies. The question was this: What was he going to use his powers to secretly serve the light? Or would he fully give in to the darkness? The darkness chose you, my wayward servant. Long ago, a dark voice spoke. Sauron didn't even need to ask. It may have been an eternity since he felt this presence, but he knew in an instant. Morgoth, what do you want from me? Sauron asked the voice. The dark voice rumbled again before speaking once more. You know what I want, to be free of the accursed prison. And you shall be the one to destroy my jailkeeper and shatter my cage. Morgoth's voice shook the frail remains of the Dark Lord. His mind was being penetrated and twisted, just like he had before. Do you forget who granted you your former memories? Proved that the light would never accept you. Need I remind you again? He roared at his servant. Once again, the memories ran through his mind. Every moment, good and bad, all so that he could be tormented once again by the betrayal that his death was utter and complete. It was then that the darkness returned fully to Sauron. In that singular moment his body returned to him. His form before his first death returned for a singular moment, on his knees, grasping his head. Arise, Sauron, reborn Dark Lord of Shadows, he roared. When he looked up and opened his eyes, the infamous flaming eyes that the world had learned to fear. Morgoth knew who he was dealing with, the cunning, the power that his former servant could now possess. He had lasted far longer than Morgoth himself as a Dark Lord. It wasn't until he was just on the verge of victory that they found a way to defeat him. However, he knew that Sauron had learned his lesson. Hell, Ilúvatar himself had to get involved twice because of Sauron's actions, once to sink Númenor and the other to revive Gandalf. When Morgoth had been the Dark Lord, Ilúvatar had let the Vala and others deal with him. In truth, he was impressed as well as enraged that he wasn't seen as such a threat. Impressed though by Sauron's determination, skill, and cunning. What is thy bidding, my master? Sauron said, returning to his shadowy form. Create your armies, break down my cage, and let me take my revenge on this world. Morgoth shouted. And so, Sauron's destiny was set, not by his own choice, but by the one who had once before dominated his mind like he had in the past, by triggering his rage at his betrayal. Immediately Sauron stood and began his work for one purpose, dominion of all living things. End flashback. Chapter 8, Sauron's Past. Tsunade and the others were all greatly disturbed. An ancient beast that had apparently not been seen since the Second Age had returned. Not only that, but it had dispatched of the ninja who attacked it so quickly. And on top of that, said ninja were transformed into werewolves themselves. And of course, the worst news was that the dire wolves had all but vanished into the Forest of Death. It was unknown where they were, but apparently, they were the new top of the food chain in the Forest of Death. When shinobi was sent in to find them, they would see the aftermath of their presence. Even the giant bears and tigers were no match for the ferocity and teamwork of the pack. Though there were no signs of the wolves themselves, the only proof of their existence was the howling that could be heard at night. But that was not the worst of what Tsunade had put together. She, Jiraiya, and the White Council had privately gathered in her office to put together what she knew. Lady Tsunade, Gandalf spoke first, his voice once again speaking like a gentle and wise grandfather. What troubles you? He was also taking her seriously. He could see in her eyes that much dread was not only in hers, but Jiraiya's face as well. You mentioned that Sauron's name while disguised was Anatar? Tsunade asked the council, all of whom nodded. Indeed, the Lord of Gifts was his title, and with it he tricked the world into making the Rings of Power. After the deception he created the One Ring, a master ring which dominated all others. Elrond answered. Tell me more about Sauron. He sounds like an indomitable foe, not just in power but in mind as well, Tsunade stated as if it were a fact. The three held downtrodden looks, none more so than Gandalf himself. We have lived for a long time, Elrond began. All of us were alive when Sauron was at the peak of his power. Gandalf himself was one of 5 that had been sent to Middle-earth with the sole purpose of combating the Dark Lord. He had actually known Sauron when he had first been known as Myron, his name meaning the Admirable One. This caused Tsunade and Jiraiya to question what they had heard so far, the Admirable One? Jiraiya reiterated, I find that hard to believe with all the stories we have heard. It was here that Gandalf smiled softly, remembering the last time he had said these words to a certain hobbit. No creature begins as evil. Even Sauron himself was once an incredible force for good. He, actually, was a dear friend of mine, long ago. They could see the depression and age on the old man's face, the thousands of years he walked in Middle-earth. The betrayals he had experienced, the wars he had fought. It was then that he began his tale. He had been an individual all mayor and below strived to be honest, hardworking, loyal, intelligent, strong, incredibly strong in fact. He had been the greatest warrior against the darkness when Morgoth became the first Dark Lord. Wait, another Dark Lord? Tsunade gasped. She knew of Sauron, she couldn't believe that there was one before him. Indeed, Melkor was of a class higher in power than the mayor known as the Vala. Galadriel spoke. This made their blood freeze. Someone with more power than Sauron? Melkor was the strongest, the favored one, but he grew power-hungry, wanting more. So, when creation began, he warped it and corrupted it, betraying all of the immortals and becoming the first Dark Lord, Morgoth. A terrible force to be reckoned with, the Vala rose up against him, loyal to Iluvatar, the creator. And one of the most influential pieces that battled against darkness was Mairon himself. He led many victories, and in his few defeats he made sure that the enemy suffered for them greatly. However, Gandalf continued, there was one battle when they were severely outnumbered, the Dark Lord himself leading the charge. Mairon himself sent all others away so that they could live. Before they left, he left his black blade Gurthang with Turin Turambar, a human, telling him to wield it well. Knowing he would die, Mairon held nothing back, slaying monsters, demons, orcs, trolls, nothing stood before him. Those who he was fighting for watched on in amazement as he struck down all who opposed him with his mace which he had forged out of the scales of the fiercest dragon. However, as the hours went by, even the great warrior grew fatigued. For even Mairon had limits as he grew tired enough to where Morgoth appeared and brought his Grond down upon him, knocking the mayor out. Everyone watched in abject horror as Merrin's body was taken away, the beasts of darkness letting out roars of victory. It may have been a defeat for good, but Mairon had brought down such a crushing blow to their forces that the enemy was forced to pull back and regroup. This gave the forces of good time to make preparations and defenses. The time Mairon had given them let them be prepared for anything, almost anything. Elrond spoke softly. Galadriel continued from there. Rather than the Dark Lord leading the charge from then on was another being, his black armor a terrifying sight. He wielded the mace of Mairon in his hand, and when he teleported, a flaming eye with a black slit would appear only to be replaced by the Dark Warrior. And his powers were not restricted to the battlefield either. His cunning and deviousness were terrifying as well, able to penetrate and twist the minds of those around him. He tore apart any and all that stood in his way. When Morgoth was finally defeated, the black-armored warrior took up the title Dark Lord and wreaked havoc wherever he went. Throughout the ages he gained many titles. The Enemy, the Shadow, the Lord of the Rings, the Dark Lord, the Lord of Wolves, the Evil One, but the name that all came to know and fear was Sauron. Gandalf finished. And so, the White Council filled them in with everything that happened during the time of Sauron, how everything he touched became foul and twisted. Only the strongest or most innocent of minds could withstand his power. And even then, if they came too close, then none have withstood him. Not even I could withstand him. Only Lady Galadriel was successful while he was weakened, and she almost was consumed by darkness to do so, Gandalf told the two Sannin. Then I guess it's a good thing that he is dead, Tsunade said with relief. Pain's theme. It was at that moment that they saw the White Council's downcast face. It was then the Sannin felt their blood freeze. He isn't dead, Jiraiya said, realizing what their faces meant. It was then that Galadriel spoke once more. The Dark Lord, he has the most indomitable will, far beyond even the fiercest of warriors. Even more so than Morgoth himself. It honestly makes me wonder how he felt to darkness himself in the first place. Galadriel pondered aloud. It is a mystery we will most likely never discover, Elrond said quietly. The Dark Lord's body was found just outside the land of Mordor, which had been sunk into the pits of hell. It is unknown as to how the body survived. But it was still breathing, his black heart still beating. But his mind was gone, cast out because his spirit was not strong enough without the ring to re-enter his body, Galadriel finished. Where is his body now? Surely you did not just leave it, Tsunade said, concerned about the risk of Sauron returning. Gandalf shook his head. No indeed, good lady, he began. Using our magic we made a cage and placed his body in there under the protection of every curse and spell, both light and dark, that each of us knew. All three of us even used our own rings of power to the point of exhausting its power in order to seal his tomb for eternity. The only way to open is impossible. The Dark Lord's bloodline is required to complete the ritual. However, even then his taint was seen. A great tree sprung up from the point of his burial, imbued with his power of beauty yet corruption, Gandalf informed them. At this point the White Council saw the visage of the Dark Lord in their mind's eye, coming out of the flaming eye and smiting all who stood against him. His vast armies rolling across the world, the many puppets that he claimed that did his bidding, Saruman, Angmar, the Nazgul, the Balrog, even the Uruk war chiefs and many others. The joy they felt when he was finally defeated, the horror when they found his breathing yet soulless armored form, they even felt ghost pains when they thought about the exhaustion that they felt upon using their power to seal his form away. Even when the One Ring was destroyed, he was reduced to a weak spirit, but not truly destroyed. Elrond began, he has lasted all these ages, but he can never again regain his strength as his soul is only a fragment of what he once was, locked up within the deepest pit of hell. However, there is someone who has powers similar to his own. An elf named Celebrimbor was the one who made the Rings of Power in the first place. He also was the only other to ever use the One Ring. However, the thing had a mind of its own and an unwavering loyalty to its master. We believe that he has survived as a wraith and refused to pass on when Sauron was defeated and is now trying to take over your world. He was known as the Bright Lord. The others looked at the White Council, completely forgetting about Anatar, their gifted rings having a faint glow. Yuzu. So, Lady Cammy was right, the fools did lock my body away rather than driving a sword through my heart, and in my own domain no less. Sauron scoffed at the fools, they would have been better off throwing it into the void with Morgoth. Even now they underestimated him, this would cause their greatest downfall. Sauron may not have been able to personally take an impact in the world. But there were so many who had been tainted by his power, the Dark One, Hades, the Queens of Darkness, the Darkness or Amara, even Lucifer was warped by him, and finally Kagaya Otatsuku herself and all of her bloodline. He knew the fact that the world had changed, but his tower was made of an obsidian metal that was near indestructible when imbued with the power of a ring, and they had used 3 to remake the tower in hell and then the cage. So, this meant that with a little bit of research he could easily find it. He looked at 2 maps that he conjured up, one of Middle-earth in the Third Age, and one of the elemental nations in the present Ninth Age. However, no matter what he did he could not find the Devil's Gate. Sure, the fragment of his spirit that was among the living was potent, but compared to the remainder of his soul that was within the cage it was spark compared to a volcano. Wait, within, what about without, he pondered, conjuring up the rest of the map. What had become of his lands beyond Mordor, farther east than any had dared go, but not he. The Dark Lord was up to the challenge. It was then that he found it, hidden away on an island within what was called the Fire Nation. Not very original, these people, Sauron said rather sarcastically. He remembered going there under the guise of Anatar as well. Giving 7 rings, 1 to each of the great leaders of the great nations, both Shinobi and Bender. Seems like I need to take a little trip to see how my investment with the Fire Nation is going, as well as size up the Ori, their mage guilds, Sauron said before vanishing into the shadows, but not before issuing orders to his men in Yuzu to continue preparations. Fire Nation, Azula's ship. Azula, princess of the Fire Nation, rolled over in her sleep as she dreamed once more of a tall mountain. Every time she looked upon it, she could hear the dark voice speaking in an ancient tongue. Somehow, however, she knew what it was saying. It spoke softly, almost seductively. She could see a terrible pit, and deep in that pit, inside the depths of hell itself, an awful cage, and inside, a being in the shadows, chained and bound. It was then she heard a voice that was almost soothing. Power, come to me, and you shall have unlimited power. You of the brightest flame, go to the mountain, only you can free my greatest warriors, and only they can free me. Free them, and when I too am free of my shackles, your foes shall be wiped from the face of the earth, it would say, and upon those last few words the voice would change to a demonic snarl and a great eye, lidless and wreathed in flame, would fill her eyesight and she would be startled awake. Azula, you all right? Ty Lee asked with great concern in her voice, rushing to her friend's side. She was panting heavily and sweating profusely. However, upon closer inspection Ty Lee saw that it was not fear Azula was feeling, but anticipation and desire. She craved and desired power, it was who she was. I'm fine Ty, better than fine. I saw the chance to win this everlasting war, she said with a dark grin on her face. Ty and Mai, who had just appeared, watched on in confusion but also excitement at the concept of quickly gaining victory. Upon reaching the helm she found the captain. Captain, I was wondering where you might be. Set course for the mountain. This made all of them gasp in horror, Oni Mountain, as it was called, was a place that had been there since the dawn of the Four Nations. The Avatar himself had demanded that they guard it, never to allow any go there. It was an order that even the Fire Nation of today had respected, until now. "Are you certain, milady?" the captain asked. "No one knows what is on Oni Mountain, only the Avatar knows of what resides within that place." This made the princess snarl. "I am well aware of the risks, but the Avatar is playing on our fears so that we do not claim the power needed to win this war. He wants us to stay weak. Set course for the pit or face my wrath." "As you wish," the captain saluted. "Set course for Oni Mountain." And so, the fire ship set course for the most forbidden, unholy location in the whole world to the Bending Nations. Chapter 9, Return of the Nine. Azula and her men marched bravely, or foolishly, as they made it to the dark crypt after hours of marching. They had not seen anything unusual aside from the dark weather that they had ever seen. Lightning crashed over the sky. This made them totally unexpected of the danger that was awaiting them. Now Sauron was no fool, one of the most intelligent of all time in fact. Able to understand another's technique and abilities just by watching, and in many ways recreate it. The Dark Lord had crafted his new rings carefully. Each given to the Jinchuriki did what they had promised, but there was something else that none knew. The rings of power were sending the power that was not a part of the ghetto statue to Oni Mountain. The Dark Lord was focused upon returning his darkest and deadliest warriors, the Nazgul. Of course, they were known as different beings now, the nine-tailed beasts. Each of them lived on reincarnated as their human forms, while the beasts were their locked power and memories, though the ninth, while existing, he had no way to return his true form. A dark ritual was needed to return him. The blood of traitors is needed to spill in order for the greatest of the nine to truly return, and he knew exactly who would be for his choice. The Dark Lord leaked dreams into the mind of the Fire Princess for years, pushing her to being ambitious, aggressive, and relentless. If any spoke of her, they would say that she was her father's daughter for certain. If they knew who had truly made her what she had become. As the men stood before the dark crypt, they had no idea the doom that would be claimed by them. Only Azula, Ty Lee, and Mai would walk out of there alive, but they wouldn't be walking out alone. When they walked in, each of the 8 firebenders following the 3 ignited their flames in order to light the way. On the walls, they saw huge images. They saw the dark warriors clad in hoods and armors, leading vast armies and inspiring fears in the hearts of enemies. However, one stood out above the 9. A warrior clad in a crowned helm and terrifying armor fitting for a dark king. They saw him take down kingdoms, warriors struck down by his blade and dark magic. Alongside him were 3 other individuals, each with different weapons. They rained ruin upon their foes, but none more so than the Dark King. The men and 3 women were in shock at what they were seeing on the carvings. The 9 were then trapped within a dark tree, which reached down into the very pits of hell and into a dark tower with a cage inside. These warriors must have been terrifying. No wonder the Avatar demanded no one enter. One soldier spoke. The group nodded. Azula was becoming more and more excited. If she could gain even an ounce of their power, she was confident of victory over the other nations, especially the Avatar. Finally, they reached the crypt and saw the 4 tombs in a row, one in the center of them and 3 others scattered through the tomb. Surrounding them were 8 statues of hooded beings with swords stabbed into the ground. They had dark carvings all over it, each imbued with an ancient power that seemed to seal the tombs, though something about the center tomb looked worse than the others. Azula noticed, however, that the power had long since passed. Cracks in the tombs proved that. "Open the tombs, I want to see if there are any artifacts among the corpses," she ordered. The men were hesitant at first, but nevertheless chose to obey. The moment they opened the crypts and looked within, an unnatural scream was heard. It echoed from within the crypt. It made their blood chill and body go numb. They all lost their focus, and the flames they were conjuring were snuffed out in an instant. Within the Akatsuki hidden chamber, something was wrong with the ghetto statue. It was shaking and screaming, the eyes were bleeding, and it was hunched over to where its face was 12 feet from the ground. The whole base shook as the Akatsuki tried to see what was going on. "What the hell's happening?" Deidara shouted over the noise. "I don't know. It's not responding to my Rinnegan." Madara shouted in shock and anger. He was using his jutsu with such intensity that his eye was bleeding. However, it was then that he heard 8 voices come from the statue. "You think you can command us?" Upon hearing this, Toby's blood froze. He recognized the type of voices he was hearing. After all, he was the current host of a former elf lord. "You may have bound us, but we answer to the one," they all shouted as one. At that instant, he watched as 8 blood pools landed on the ground. The 8 open eyes became half-lidded. Out of the blood rose 8 figures that Toby knew he and the others needed to flee from. What made his blood freeze was the fact that each of the 8 beings possessed the visages of the Jinchuriki they had been ripped out of. In that same moment, all of those Jinchuriki had vanished across the village. "The Nazgul! Run, Obito! You are no match for them!" Celebrimbor shouted at the Uchiha. He was too frightened, however. As the Nazgul materialized, they suddenly let out their shrilling scream, and the lights went out. By the time any could see again, the Nazgul were gone. The only light was the cavern entrance the 8 had just smashed through to leave. "Where are they going? What the hell were they, and what did they mean by the one?" asked Kakuzu. However, it was Haydn that responded, his body trembling with exhilaration. "Those were the Nazgul, wraiths of a time long past, the time of Jashin," Haydn said almost with reverence. Toby was looking at the entrance with a glazed stare. "They are the harbingers of death. Should they complete in their mission, then this world will fall to a terrible darkness. Middle-earth shall bow to me, not some slaves of a dead master," screamed the Bright Lord. Back in the crypt, Azula lit up her own flames and was terrified yet exhilarated to see what was happening. 8 terrible ghostly figures in strange armors that looked ancient and deadly. But 3 skeletal figures had their hands in their soldiers, and they watched as their lives were sucked out of them. They turned to ash in the next second, and the skeletal figures now had form. Their armor was dark and menacing, each wielding strange weapons. One held a giant mace, donning heavy armor, another had terrifying axes and with armor that appeared grafted to his flesh, and the final was in black robes with a high helm that hid his head save for his grotesque and sharp-toothed mouth. He had a menacing sword on his hip and a staff in his hand. Mai had her weapons drawn. Ty Lee was shaking from what she sensed from them. Now the 2 of them had rational actions. Azula, however, was excited as her efforts had finally paid off. "You have freed us, Herald of the Dark Lord," one of the armored ghosts spoke in a deep raspy voice. Azula was surprised by what she had just heard, as were the others. "What do you mean, Dark Lord?" asked the Fire Princess. "Do you mean the one in the cage that was in my dreams?" They all nodded. "He has chosen you to free us, and since you have, your war shall be won. Who are you?" Ty Lee asked timidly, trying to be courageous for her friends. The truth was, though, that none of them were feeling very brave at this moment. Ghosts and vampiric beings just sucked the life out of their men. "I am the Hammer of Sauron," the first answered. "I am the Tower of Sauron," the second answered. "I am the Mouth of Sauron," the final one spoke. The group looked around only to see that the fourth was not open yet, the Tomb of the Witch King. Azula liked the sound of this. "All right, so what do we do next?" she asked. The 2 behind her were extremely thankful that these ghostly figures were not attacking. The 3 women could tell that not only were they ghosts, but they were fierce warriors, far fiercer than any they have ever faced. "Our king must return, then, by the blood of the Dark Lord, shall the one be freed," one of the ghostly figures spoke, just as menacing as his brothers. "All right, what must be done?" Azula asked them. "You will come with us to free the Dark Lord from his prison." Elemental Nations months later. Galadriel and Natsumi were speaking in private about what she had sensed before the wolves' attack. They went to Natsumi's apartment and spent hours conversing, getting to know one another so that they could be comfortable. Stories were shared among the 2 about their lives, many stories of good versus evil. Then finally Natsumi's story of how she lost her brother was finally brought up. "I understand that you lost your brother a few years ago, and he has been on your mind for quite some time," Galadriel spoke as she watched Natsumi's face become downcast. She had enjoyed hearing all the stories from the first time that she was here. But now that this was being brought up, her heart sank. She looked out at the night. It was a new moon, so it was hard to see anything beyond the village. "Naruto was my hero, my role model," she began. "He pushed me to go further than anyone else, even my own teachers. Just by proving himself over and over despite what anyone would say or do, he always proved them wrong. Not only that, but he always had a way with people. He could make you believe him just by using his words. His passion pierced even the coldest of hearts and could change their very outlook on life." Zabuza, Niji, Gaara of the Sands, even the former leader of the Akatsuki Pain changed after listening to his words. Galadriel fought back. It reminded her of so many heroes and friends during her time in Middle-earth. "He sounds like an incredible warrior and an even greater friend, not to mention possessing intelligence with words." At this Natsumi giggled. Actually he was a bit of an idiot, this surprised Galadriel. He always was loud and obnoxious, shouting at the top of his lungs about some things that were actually idiotic. Other things? She paused as she wiped a tear. Other things were his dreams and goals. He dreamed to change the meaning of shinobi, and then become the greatest Hokage or any other Kage ever to be been seen and respected. This struck a chord with Galadriel. He was a true enigma that none could figure out. So, contrast in his behaviors, it made one wonder which personality was truly him. But then was cut down. After having saved Konoha, risking his own life, he took on multiple attackers and drove them away. Natuzme continued, her voice cracking at this point. She then pulled out from beneath her shirt something that made Galadriel's heart stop for a moment, a simple golden ring, held around her neck by a silver chain. She was running her fingers across it, similar to the way poor Frodo once did to the Master Ring. But then, we found Naruto's body, gashed up and decapitated. It wasn't the Akatsuki because they needed him alive. I came to believe I found the culprits, but it was then that I felt I knew who had killed him. But I thought it was a dead end, until you mentioned the abilities of Celebrimbor. At this her gaze grew cold. It was his friends that killed him, by the influence of Celebrimbor. This made Galadriel concerned. The Bright Lord had influence here? This could only mean a few things. However, before she could respond, her ring pulsed. Knife in the dark. As she felt terror, true terror shoots through her spine, as she had not felt this power course through her veins since the Third Age, the strength given to the bearer of a ring of power. Horror flashed through her as she looked upon Natsume's ring, but then she realized what this meant. Another ring of power had been forged. Celebrimbor had succeeded. However, apparently fate determined that this wasn't enough for the men and women of Konoha, as she then heard screams ringing throughout the village. Now Natsume could recognize all of them. My friends, she screamed in concern. She dashed off and ran through the village to find them in the main courtyard in front of Hokage Tower, all of them crucified against by their hands by kunai. Their blood was being collected by 8 hooded and cloaked figures. All of them were chanting in an old and dark tongue, unknown to the present world. Get away from my friends, she snarled, expecting Kurama's power to help her, but none came aside from the strength she had taken from him. Instead, she felt anticipation, excitement, and familiarity. Kurama, what is going on? She asked, her face showing her confusion. She then heard terrible moans from her friends. She looked up to see all of them, pale and sickly, looking at her. Natsume-chan, run! Sakura groaned. However, the black breath was affecting her just as much as the others, and she slowly passed back into darkness. The time has come, the mouth of Sauron, to return our brother. It was then that he and the others began chanting, each placing their power into the seal that had, unknown to Natsume, been created around her in blood. By the blood of traitors and the soul powers of the Dark Lord, rise my brother from your demise and reign amongst the mortals once more, the mouth proclaimed. Mina's Morgul theme. It was then that the blood glowed as if it had been lit on fire. Natsume then realized too late that a seal had surrounded her, and in an instant Kurama was being ripped from her own seal. A great red light shot into the sky. The whole village and far beyond could see the bright red light, hear the menacing roar of the Nine Tails. She then let out her own terrible scream of pain and suffering as she watched instead of a massive fox came out of her gut, a hand covered in a clawed gauntlet. Natsume, her wounded friends shouted. Many other shinobi were arriving to the scene as well. Even the Akatsuki was watching from afar. However, the 8 Nazgul surrounded the seal, and the hammer, tower, and mouth were standing just a few short feet from Natsume as they continued chanting in the black speech. At this point Tsunade had finally appeared alongside Jiraiya. Both were filled with fear and confusion. The being crawling out of her seal looked nothing like the famed Nine Tails. But seeing his form feared them far more than anything before. He looked more like a demon than even the fox. Jiraiya! We have to do something, Tsunade said as she popping her knuckles. Jiraiya jumped down with her, and the two of them rushed to help her and force the fox back into the seal. However, the mouth chanted in the same dark language and made a shield. Both of the Sannin attacked the barrier with their preferred methods of attack, but it was all for naught. QB released. In another flash everyone was forced to block their eyes for several moments. The ground shook and the sky clashed lightning. The lightning struck the barrier and the light dimmed down. As it did, they all looked to see Natsume on her knees and her head slumped forward. The blood of traitors has been spilt, the ritual is complete. Behold, you fools! The Witch King fights once more, he roared. Kneeling in front of her, dark armor and robes, the Witch King of Angmar himself. Kurama's true form had finally been returned to him. I leave the power you took so that you may remain strong, you will need it for the trials to come. Angmar whispered. Natsumi was beyond shocked by what she had seen. The Witch King then stood his full menacing height and knocked Tsunade's fist away and caught Jiraiya's just as they came in to strike. He then grabbed both by the throat and pulled them close. A black mist came from under his hooded helm and was inhaled by the two of them. Both of them were suddenly slumped over, a darkness over their eyes. It was then they could hear shouting and running. People were getting closer and the Nazgul knew they needed to vanish in order to stay unknown to the White Council. So, they grabbed Natsumi, summoned their steeds, and vanished into the night. The fog faded and when it did the shinobi were all horrified of the scene. The whole place looked like a demonic ritual, though they had no idea that is what it truly was, until the White Council arrived. Everybody back! Elrond called. He then rushed to the wounded first, inspecting them calmly, until it became concern, which then became horror. Each of them had their hands stabbed through the wall with their own kunai. But that was easily treated. What were a concern were the wounds in their abdomens that reeked of death. The wounds were inflicted by a mortal blade. To affirm this, the blade hilt was left behind. To make matters worse, they were all suffering from the effects of the Black Breath. Gandalf! Galadriel! Get Athelas, he cried. Immediately they realized what was happening and grabbed the ingredients needed. Elrond instructed the medic to take down the crucified shinobi, which they did so with great care. It took several hours just to stabilize them, and several days for them to come out of their comas. When they finally did, they had a terrible truth revealed to them. The whole group woke as one, taking a huge breath in like they had just come out of deep dark water. Within those black depths, they were forced to watch as their own hands cut down their best friend. They were then forced to see their friend Natsumi being held by ethereal chains. Her eyes rolled back in a silent scream as a black hand tore from the earth where her blood had pooled down. Soon stood a menacing monster of a man, donned in black armor, who seemed to speak in a dark language, but they understood him. There is nothing for you here, only death. Naruto, they all shouted as one. Their eyes changing from a glowing blue to normal as the Bright Lord's control wavered. The memory coming to them by dream was caused by the sudden appearance of other wraiths, one who was stronger than even the Bright Lord. Though with his ring of power it would soon tip the scales in his favor. Though none really knew what the endgame was that he had, only Celebrimbor himself knew. Soon nurses and doctors had come rushing into the coma ward and were assessing the situation from their physical wounds. Gandalf and the others came in to handle to demonic ailments that were beyond that of the medics. However, this took longer than expected, due to the fact that they were constantly trying to get up while say a full sentence. None heard them due to them trying to treat them. "Children, why are you so keen to rise and fight once more?" asked the Lady of Light. She grew concerned when they could not find Natsumi. They had been searching since the dark mist. It was Hinata that she was facing them, and upon looking straight into her eyes she saw the horror and fear. What could have possibly been making her so horrified? Ghostly figures, 3 monstrous men, crucified us. Another rose from our blood, one like a mix of the two groups. They took Natsumi, cried the dark-haired woman. This caused the White Council to take on a face of fear. They immediately looked at their rings, fearing the worst. As they tried to summon the power within their rings, they feared the worst. They breathed a sigh of relief as their rings of power were just as dead as they had been the time Sauron fell. The Dark Lord wasn't back, since his ring fell into the lava, and since then their own ring's power have vanished as well. Darkness was no longer their problem. It was light that had become prideful and burned so bright it threatened to destroy all it touched. But if that were the case, how did Celebrimbor summon Sauron's servants from beyond the realm of death? There was truly only one answer: he had forged his own master ring of power. But that made no sense. They would have known. Celebrimbor made the others after all, and if he truly wanted to have no threats, he would create a master ring just linked to theirs, just as Sauron had done. They would have to worry about that later. Right now the Nazgul and the horsemen had taken Natsumi to do only Arrow knew what. But they knew where to look: the land of demons, the farthest east that one could go without being lost to endless seas. In truth, only Sauron knew what was beyond his shores, if he even possessed an eastern border. Land of maelstroms. Mordor had become submerged upon his death. It would take a massive amount of power to return his home. And to do that, he needed his sister. It pained him that he was going to be forced to use his own sister in a painful process, but he had no choice. Only by her blood could he be saved. He was tired of being just able to send his mind out of the cage. He needed out completely, he knew only she could free him. "Forgive me, my dear sister, hopefully one day you will forgive your brother," Sauron said quietly. The Dark Lord looked upon his horrid sigils and marks he had placed on her. His sister would be drastically drained of chakra, probably in a temporary coma. What's more, he was not a fool as to what would happen next. The Cage of Hell is by far the worst thing ever created by immortal hands. Hidden so far into the underworld that not even he had the answer, until now. Thanks to the foolish White Council, he now knew what must be done. Once that cage is destroyed, his entire power would be restored to him. The Master Ring would return to its lord, but he would have to conceal its power lest the elves find out about him like last time. Though it was only a matter of time, he could only delay them. "My lord," spoke a voice behind him. He turned his attention toward a samurai donned in black armor. He was down on a knee and his head low. "We have received word of a group infiltrating our borders that appears to be Akatsuki." Sauron looked at the floating palantir at the center of the tower's roof, seeing the group, and leading them was an old friend. "So, we do see to it they are invited once they get deep enough into our territory," Sauron ordered, peacefully, "if possible, but I want them unspoiled." The samurai bowed before turning and walking away. The Dark Lord was surprised they found the clues so quickly. But it was still too little too late. Angmar! Himura! Sauron roared above the conversation of the populace. All looked up to see the black shadow dancing upon the top of Orthanc. He was thankful that one of the towers still stood, thought he looked forward to seeing Barad-dûr once more. Phasing into existence were his two captains, the Witch King, head of the supernatural, and Himura, head of the human warriors. Nazgul Lord and the Shadow both stood before the shadowed mass. "Yes, my lord," asked the two, both without motion, waiting upon their master's command. "The time has come, Himura, you will announce the return of the land of Yuzu and lead the search of the Akatsuki. From the land of Iron, Angmar's black Númenóreans shall also step forth and show these ninja the might of the samurai. From Yuzu the shinobi shall reign upon this world. Your main goal, however, is to keep the eyes of the White Council off me long enough to regain my power and conquer the other side of the world. I hear Pain has been resurrected as well by that snake Kabuto. Now leave, Angmar and I must plan the other part." "Yes, my lord," Himura said and vanished. Sauron then turned to Angmar. "Prepare for the ritual, our armies are growing but we have not the land to increase their numbers. I and my land must return at once. Leak the location of the ritual in order to the shinobi." "As you wish, my lord." Angmar departed, his fellow Nazgul riding off with a still unconscious Natsumi in tow. Not much longer, Sauron thought, until his body would be freed from the Cage of Hell. Then nothing would stand in his way. The Dark Lord looked upon his horsemen and felt a sense of pride rush through him for his creations. They were the embodiment of his will. The hammer, war. The mouth, famine. The tower, plague. The Witch King, death. They were his deadliest warriors, more powerful than any other in his army. And once his powers returned, he would lead them to a glorious victory with standing by his master's side. He then turned to the newest members of his forces, Azula and her entourage. What to do with them? Welcome, Daughters of Darkness. Chapter 10, To War, the Ultimatum. Tsunade was in her office working on methods to find Natsumi when suddenly she was interrupted by Shizune, who had come in with a look of pure surprise on her face. "Lady Tsunade," she yelled at her. Tsunade rolled her eyes. "What now?" she snapped, until she saw the seal that was before her, the Yuzukage. "The land of Maelstroms has returned," she said in fear and shock. The land of Maelstroms, the fiercest shinobi warriors to ever be seen, the only known to keep up regularly with the samurai of the land of Iron. They were strong allies of the Leaf, until they were wiped out by the combined forces of the Mist and Cloud, though they took 20 of every enemy before falling themselves. Their sacrifice was what allowed the Leaf to prevail, not to mention the rage that Leaf felt for the fall of their sister village. She looked down upon the seal before breaking it and opening the scroll. When she did, her jaw dropped, her eyes widened, and her heart raced. This was the seal of the Yuzukage, the leader of the sister village of Konoha, wiped out in the Third Great Ninja War. The fact that she was receiving a demand from them, it made her chill to the core. She couldn't begin to imagine what the Stone and Cloud villages were thinking with seeing this summons. Shizune. Clear my schedule, send contracts to Fiore and prepare my guards, we are heading for the Land of Iron, she ordered. Immediately Shizune ran out of the room. In the next moment she had to act quickly, they had just recovered, but she had no choice. Death Squad, she barked. Immediately the 10 appeared, though they had just been crucified and used in a dark ritual, they were back on duty. They were more determined to save the last living memory of their knucklehead friend. If that meant going on missions despite the pain, they would do it. You will be divided into 3 groups, Alpha, Beta, and Omega, she began. Team Alpha, you will be coming with me to the Land of Iron. Beta team is going to look up every lead possible. And Team Omega, your mission is to find Sasuke Uchiha and bring him into finding Natsumi. When you find him, you are to converge and work together to take the kidnappers out and bring me back my goddaughter. And so, they all departed. Team Alpha Inoshikacho took off for the Land of Iron with the Hokage as the others took off as well. Little did any of them know that they were not the only ones who would be heading in the direction of the darkness. On a road near the Land of Maelstroms, Sasuke slow theme. Sasuke Uchiha had been walking for several days. A tall black tower in the distance in front of him had finally appeared on the horizon. A lot of thoughts were running through his head of what the masked Uchiha had told him. Flashback: the Akatsuki Halls in AIM. Tune continues. I need you to investigate rumors of people inhabiting the old ruins of Yuzu. The masked Uchiha spoke to Sasuke behind him. The others who followed him were staying further back in the shadows. They were well aware that someone with a mask could be no one, but could also be deadly. Why should I bother with this? Sasuke asked, an annoyed look on his face. Why not have one of the other grunts here go see what's going on? Because this is a family matter, he snapped, his Sharingan blazing through the hole in the mask. The others took a further step back in fear, though the fellow Uchiha stood his ground, however, his black eyes glaring back at him. The power of the Geto statue is halved. Rumors of the bending continents are on the march, and bounty hunters from Fiore are on receiving contracts from the 5 shinobi lands, he explained. All traces of the dark energy that stripped itself from the statue resides there, he answered. He didn't want to tell him about the Nazgul nor the threat of Sauron. That was something Celebrimbor and himself knew, and the real Madara. And he didn't want the young man to get any ideas. Investigate what is going on and report back to me. End flashback. He was brought out of his musings when suddenly he and the others were surrounded by what appeared to be a mass of samurai as well as shinobi. The shinobi wore armor and garments as black as night, and the samurai donned armor of different variants, but the fanged skull mask was similar on each of them. There was one thing that you could see in every one of them: they were battle-hardened veterans and more than ready to kill. Oh crap! Suigetsu muttered. He didn't even have time to grab his blade before they were upon them. I didn't even sense them, Karen gasped. How? Stay calm. If they wanted us dead, I doubt we'd still be standing, Yugo commented. They were more frightened by the samurai than they were the ninjas. They were from the more ancient times and their skill was renowned. It was perhaps only Sasuke who could take these men on. And for how long, they wondered. Stepping forth was a specific warrior, a samurai in black armor, spikes and blades along his armor, and crimson eyes glowed from beneath the helm. Sasuke Uchiha, our master has requested your presence, the samurai spoke with a sense of finality in his voice. It was clear that there was no negotiation, and that this was no request. It was a demand. Thinking hard, he weighed his options. He already had many people after his head. It was in this moment that chose to swallow his pride and nodded. The samurai nodded in return, and they began to walk to the tall tower in the distance, not realizing what, or rather who they'd face. As they reached the village, they saw destruction as far as the eye could see. Broken skeletons and rusted weapons littered the landscape. Overgrowth had taken over, and the place had every sign of an abandoned ruin. Your master lies here? Sasuke scoffed. How pathetic. This comment was met with a blade at his throat. One of the other samurai had a killer's look in his eyes, and to hear their master insulted was an insult that must be repaid in blood. Traitor filth! You shall not insult our lord, the samurai snarled. Katsumoto, the black-armored samurai, spoke. Stay your blade, the master did order him alive. Reluctantly, he sheathed his blade, trying to not smack the smug look off Sasuke's face. As fate would have it, however, his commanding officer would take of it for him, by kicking the Uchiha in the gut and knocking him onto his back. Coughing up blood, he struggled to regain his vision and was met with the fanged skeleton mask that belonged to the black-armored warrior. But it doesn't mean we will allow the insult to pass, he growled as well. He then turned around and flashed through hand signs, ensuring the Uchiha did not catch them. He then held a hand to ruined wall. Release. In a flash of blinding light, they were met with the sight of massive walls, twice the height of the walls at Konoha. They were met by the sight of strange warriors they hadn't seen before standing guard at the entrance. All of them were tall and muscular, donning armor from head to toe in black steel and a full helm that had slits for eyes. Their blades were also different from their culture, double-edged and with a crossguard. They were longer than a katana, thicker too. They stood still and silent, their blades pointed at the ground and their arm resting on the crossguard. All in all, they were an unknown and frightening sight. "Welcome back," stated what Sasuke assumed to be the captain of the guard. His voice echoed within his helm and seemed to add a dark tone to it. "Greetings, Knights of Numenor, I have the guests the master has asked for," the samurai stated. The others noted the tone of the word guest. The knight, as he was called, nodded before stepping back and allowing two others to open the door. When they got a good look inside, they were astonished and surprised. A full-grown metropolis was inside the walls. People were hustling around happily and taking on their regular errands and chores. Children rushed around and played with one another as their parents watched and laughed. However, when the newcomers were escorted by the samurai, everyone was silent. They pulled their children close and backed away from the group as the people who were in the small city they muttered about the newcomers. Sasuke ignored them, opting to stay quiet. The others followed suit and stayed silent as they made it closer to the tower. As they did, they noticed more of these knights. There were several of them, just standing there in constant vigil over the crowd. However, their helms followed the newcomers as they went. The members of the Taka were aware of this and they were prepared to move if needed. As they reached the tower, they were in awe of the true height, as if it went to the heavens itself. But there was a sudden change in the landscape. If the city was peace, this was war. Saruman's March Isengard unleashed. The land was scorched and dead, mud and dirt everywhere. War machines being evaluated and inspected. Platoons and squads of armored soldiers were training and fighting with one another brutally. Their armor was strange, similar to the knights, but more crude and more brutal looking. There was one moment, however, that made Karen's blood run cold. She froze in place, unable to move. She could feel their literal bloodlust, and she found why when a soldier removed his helmet. He wasn't human, the fangs and razor-sharp teeth, the black charred-looking skin, they weren't human. Even their language was foul and violent. What in God's name are they?" Oishi gasped out. "Our Lord's creation, the orcs and the mighty urukai," the black samurai spoke calmly. "They are fierce, bloodthirsty warriors, capable of destroying any in their path." They got a closer look at the monstrosities. They were muscle-bound and powerful. There were other, smaller orcs that were running around and training as well. In the distance, they could have sworn they saw some of them riding on enormous wolves. When they finally reached the tower, there were no guards, no sign of any beings that defending their leader, yet they still felt an immense dread in their core. The tower reached higher than the Hokage monument in Konoha. It was in this moment that Karen grew ill and fell to her knees as she began to vomit. "Karen!" Yugo exclaimed, concerned, as he and Suigetsu dropped to their knees to tend to her. Even Sasuke seemed to be slightly concerned for his comrade. "What the hell is the matter with you?" Suigetsu asked, disgusted by the bile, yet he could not deny internally he was very concerned. This place," she gagged, "its chakra is so foul and malicious. Its power is immeasurable." Sasuke looked back at the tower, who had Madara crossed. "Move," one of the soldiers nudged Suigetsu in the back. The others were forced to do the same. Slowly but sure they walked inside before heading to the stairs. Small flames lit the enormous stairway, and here it appeared that there were several people in cloaks and robes, reading tomes and books, and others were doing different things that just by looking they couldn't understand. As they reached the top, they heard female voices speaking with someone, a dark and menacing voice. Similar to Orochimaru, he realized, but it was far more menacing and darker. But he also spoke with an intelligence in his voice that was unsurpassed. "Ensure everything is prepared as I have instructed. We shall ensure victory in the war," the voice said. "Now excuse me, I have guests." On a road near Yuzu territory, Beta Team. Team Beta was working hard to investigate any and all leads as to the monstrosities that they took their friend. They had been given a brief rundown of what had attacked them, but even then, they could only grasp the minimum of what they were facing. They knew that fire and water were the weakness of the Black Riders. However, having the blades of the Nazgul pierce their own flesh, they too have their weaknesses now to the adversaries they hunted. Though there were some strengths as well, somehow, they could see better in the dark, their senses were heightened and their perceptions were sharper. They were told, however, at the very beginning of their voyage, "If you find the Lord of the Nazgul, run," Gladriel had told them, "for it is he who has made you what you are and your blades will not harm him." Amon Hen. Taking those words to heart concerned them greatly. They hadn't quite figured out what they were going to do about him. And there of course was the fact that the nine-tailed beasts were in fact the 9 Black Riders. They knew of the powers at their disposal, how could they possibly defeat even one of them? It was in that moment that they heard a scream, human thankfully, but it was a frightened and panicked scream. They leapt into the trees and rushed to see what the cause of the disturbance was. But what they saw made even their skin crawl with fear and disgust. A small caravan had been attacked by what at first appeared to be bandits and raiders. Laughing as they fought and killed those who tried to resist them, but then the ANBU got a good look. While the victims were indeed human, the beings attacking them were far from it. Snarling, vicious fanged mouths, dark skin of various colors, and eyes of rabid animals. Their various weapons cut, cleaved, and bashed into their prey. Sometimes, however, one of these monsters would forget using his weapon altogether and start ripping chunks out of them with their fang-filled maws. What the hell are these things? Sloth gasped in horror as his mind flared, watching a few of the travelers attempt to defend themselves while others hid their children away from the menacing eyes of the monsters. He saw they had neither chakra points nor a chakra system. "I have no idea, I have never seen these things before," Dove said as she clenched at one of her weapon scrolls tightly. "But we can't just sit here." "Agreed, this could be a new threat to the Leaf," Bear exclaimed as he cracked his knuckles. "Let's move!" Sloth shouted before leaping to the forest floor and dashing forth, brandishing his katana, and using his superior intellect to find an opening as he slashed a monster across the throat, black blood gushing forth along with a gargled bestial scream. This caught the attention of the other monsters, who snarled and spoke in a gnashing and snarling tongue. They all charged forth, only for the first to have Bear to deliver an overgrown punch to the closest and send its face into the forest floor. Dove was the last to jump into the fray, sending a barrage of kunai flying into the mass of flesh-eaters. Some raised shields and others' armor protected them. A few, however, weren't so lucky as the knives tore through them or went between the armor. "Run!" Sloth shouted to the survivors, who didn't hesitate to obey. They turned and ran for the shadows of the trees and watched their saviors battle. It was at the moment the Dove unsheathed her blade and lashed out, cutting down several of these monsters. Bear grew his muscles to considerable size before landing blow after blow upon the enemy. However, upon engaging the monsters, they realized these beasts were fairly well trained with a variety of crude weapons. Dove was forced to dodge a large axe from cleaving him in two. Sloth was forced to duck under a heavy mace, and Bear, despite his best efforts, was beginning to waver. Their armor, while crude in anything but attractive, it was effective. Sloth and Dove were about to go through hand signs when suddenly they heard fong over fong. 2 vortexes crashed into the mass of monsters, tearing many into shreds. The monsters yelped in surprise as soon as they realized they had been flanked. From a second direction, the dying cries of beasts was heard when another figure dropped to the ground. Ethereal lions raging from her hands, she blasted away monster after monster. A large number of the monsters were overwhelmed that drained the monsters, biting them all over as they cried in agony. Finally, a mass of ink beasts leads by a superpowered pink ANBU and a serpent mistress, Team Omega, had entered the fray. Now their skills were enough. Left and right the monsters fell, many of them fled, one of them however they found still alive yet badly wounded. They got it to its knees and Swarm placed one of his bugs on the beast's neck. "If you understand me, this scorpion contains enough venom to take down a beast far larger than you, so I suggest you speak," Swarm told the monster. Snarling, it nodded. "What are you?" he asked the monster. "You young bloods are so naive," his guttural voice came out, black blood sliding from his lips sickeningly. "I'm an orc." "We've been here a long time, you stupid piece of meat." An agonized cry as the scorpion snapped a claw at the orc's ear. He snarled at his captors before realizing that he would sooner lose his head. The 6 figures before him all tensed, an orc? So, this is what the mythos monster looked like. They looked at the clearing to see the dozens of dead at their feet, then at one another, all of them with cuts, bruises, and scratches. "Why are you here, orc? Why come out of hiding now?" Sloth asked, pressing a kunai to the orc's throat. Because our master commanded it, you brat, he snarled. We don't question our commanders, beside, it's good sport. This made their blood boil, these monstrosities did this for fun? What? Enough of this, Dove, check his mind, Sloth ordered. Dove nodded as she walked up to the orc and placed a hand on his head. In an instant the orc went rigid in a silent scream as Dove entered his mind. She was filled with anger as she watched him and his horde attack caravan after caravan. Finally, she found the memory where she found their tracks led from a strange place with a tall dark tower, and a brief moment she saw one of the hooded figures that had attacked them. She exited the orc's mind before looking at the others. It appears the orc came from somewhere near Yuzu. I am unaware whether Yuzu itself caused this, but their BO is somewhere nearby. Furthermore, the Nazgul is there with Natsumi. He cackled happily. You fools know nothing, your world will burn under the gaze of the One. The flames of war are upon you. He snarled and leapt forward, only for Dove's stiletto heel to stab into his throat. She pulled back her heel as the orc crumbled to the floor. Sounds like these orcs are only going to cause more problems unless we deal with them, Sloth commented. Indeed, Swarm agreed, we need to head to Yuzu and do what we can to eliminate the threat and rescue Natsumi. They all nodded before vanishing in a twirl of leaves. Yuzu go cure. So, what is this? How come I can't see through your genjutsu? Sasuke asked as his Sharingan flared. The shadowy form of a man chuckled, he didn't like it. My dear friend, how do you know this isn't my true form? The shade asked him. Unless you're a demon, I doubt it, Sasuke snapped back. There are gods above us, what makes you think there aren't demons below? It asked. Within the shadow Sasuke saw a fanged grin appear. I believe your friend vanquished one in the land of the demons with the priestess, the shade responded. Sasuke flinched at the thought of his friend. He had not heard much about him for a few years now aside from the destruction of the Age of Demon. Sasuke had no response to him, however. He looked around and saw 9 hooded figures. They all were very tall and held a menacing blade similar to the knights, though they were ancient looking and blackened. They stood silent vigil of their master. In truth, you are correct, I am but a shadow of my former self. My body is locked away as I try to find ways to free it. This is what you might call an out-of-body experience, the shade explained. So, what does that have to do with me? The Uchiha asked. I understand that you have had recent activities with the Akatsuki, it responded as it floated a little closer to him. I was hoping I could convince you to switch sides. And why would I do that? They promised to help me destroy the leaf, Sasuke asked, though both of them knew he was asking if he had a better offer. The shade chuckled before going to the edge of the tower toward the port of Yuzu. Because, my dear friend, he ushered him and his companions over, I have forces that not even the feared Akatsuki could hope to match. And when Sasuke Uchiha and the rest of the Taka looked out, they were horrified. LOTR March of Isengard. He wasn't able to see all of them on the ground, but now he saw them. Hundreds of thousands of the Urukai in their blackened and jagged plate armor marched in legions toward the docks, and they were not alone. Monstrous beings 3 times their height and size in their own plated and spiked armor marched right with them. Many of them were moving siege equipment onto the battle carriers. Leading these warriors of hell were the Knights of Numenor, and leading them were the Black Captains, the Mouth, the Hammer, and the Tower. They were all boarding onto jagged metal vessels that had appeared out of nowhere. The black and red coating of the vessels created a menacing sight upon the sea. As the Urukai marched, they let out a menacing chant that shook the earth. My God! Suigetsu could only mutter. I've never seen such power, Karen gasped. Sasuke, Yugo spoke up, if you truly wish for the destruction of the leaf, then this may be your best option. On the mountains, near Yuzu. Sasuke and his allies were not the only ones who were witnessing the massive forces moving from the land of Yuzu. Moments earlier they were looking upon the ruins of Yuzu, now tens of thousands of monstrous troops were moving onto boats that seemed to be going across the sea, a place few shinobi ever explored due to the continent's own wars. Though they knew of 2 other continents and that each had their own countries, abilities, and beliefs, and based on these foreign ships, Yuzu had declared war on them. We have to return to warn the great nations. Bear told his allies. Not without Natsumi, snapped Tigress. Her white eyes looking over at her comrades. She's right, our primary objectives is to find and rescue Natsumi, Sloth commented, head for the tower. They have to be there. At the docks. Azula, Ty Lee, and Mike could not help but be in awe at the force they had allied with. These monstrosities were hideous, but they were powerful and it was clear their purpose, war. I almost feel sorry for the enemies of the Fire Nation, Mai said in her monotone voice. For real? Ty Lee looked at Azula. Azula, are you sure about this? I have never felt such foul and tainted auras before. She could almost see the black shadow of their souls. Azula continued to grin as she looked upon them. I am very sure, she replied as she petted one of the great wolves that walked by. With these armies along with our own, they don't stand a chance. This war will be swift. And with that they boarding the flagship and prepared to head out. Back at the tower, Sasuke looked at the Shade, who was still looking upon his war machine. Why show me all this? When you know I have allied with your enemy? The Shade looked upon him. Because I possess knowledge that you do not, as well as leverage. Sasuke scowled at that thought. What do you mean? Do you know about the hero of the leaf? The Shade asked. Sasuke nodded. A little. He defended the leaf from an attack by the Akatsuki, however he himself didn't make it. Sasuke answered. What does this have to do with anything? And what leverage do you have? The Shade only grinned again as he looked to one of a voice to speak out. You. Ah, right on schedule. The Shade turned to see the aggressors. Welcome, Shinobi of Konoha. I have been waiting for you. You, Kiba snarled, you stole the Forbidden Scroll. Very astute of you, pup, the Shade mocked. I am indeed. You also defiled the statue to our hero, snapped Hinata. I merely made it realistic, he responded. It was too perfect. At least now you could see what was done to him as thanks for his victory. This made the group go pale. Sasuke noticed this and listened as Ino asked, how do you know this? They flinched as they saw the Shade grin evilly. Oh come now my lovely Kuniochi, he said as his ethereal hand stroked her face. She couldn't bring herself to look away from his dark gaze. Who do you think it was that told Natsumi of the true identities of her brother's killers? Bastard, snapped Shikamaru, you did that. She nearly killed us. The Shade did not turn to face him as he continued to look upon Ino. For some reason Ino didn't move away from the dark figure. Yes, he said sorrowfully, I was disappointed when I found out that she failed to avenge her brother. That is until my faithful Nazgul told me something I had not expected. It was then that they noticed the Lord of the Nazgul. Their hearts sank. They knew now they were truly powerless, for the one who held their leash was before them. Ninetales released OST. Apparently my mortal enemy had brainwashed you and locked the memory away, the Shade said as he finally stopped looking at Ino, and that is a barrier I intend to eradicate. Sasuke and the Taka jumped back at the sudden flare of power and the change in the Shade's voice. Flames ripped around and penetrated the minds of the ANBU for a brief moment as they screamed in pain. They all dropped to the ground and grabbed their heads. And no, it can't be true. Hinata gasped. There's no way we could do such a thing. Not to our friend. Ino said as she pulled at her hair. None of them had gotten close to standing yet. Even Akamaru was whining from the thought of sinking his teeth into their old friend. Ys, face the reality that it was you killed Naruto Uzumaki. Sasuke snapped into reality. What? His Mangekyo Sharingan flared. He hadn't even known that his friend was dead. Now he hears his former comrades killed him. The Shade looked upon the Uchiha as the Taka, while confused took a step back from their leader. Indeed, it is their weakness that they were brainwashed by your leader to kill him in the hopes that capturing the Ninetales upon coming back from death would be easier than to take on Naruto himself. But then he realized the Natsumi was in fact the Jinchuriki and has been biding his time to take her, but I got to her first. And in a swirl of dark mist and shadow they all vanished from Yuzu. They were now in a place that none recognized. They had teleported. They were now at some sort of demonic altar in some underground cavern. At the altar itself they saw two tall pillars that had some sort of crown and spiked helmet engraved onto them. On the wall behind the two pillars is the engraving of a terrifying eye. Upon regaining their composure from the sudden teleportation, they saw something that made their blood freeze. Between the pillars was Natsumi Uzumaki, bound in black ethereal flames and glowing crimson runes and letters etched all across her form. On her forehead was the symbol of the great eye on her forehead. Natsumi, the shinobi from Konoha, yelled. The Taka were surprised to see that their leader was so concerned. Something had finally broken through his cold shell. Release her, now! Sasuke ordered as the Susanoo enveloped him, its ethereal bow aimed at the Shade. The Shade responded, like I said I have leverage. What do you want? He snarled. The other shinobi were amazed to see the newfound power of their old comrade. Sasuke! Sakura whispered. Simple, allow me to finish my task, the Shade answered, after which you can take her from here. I'm uncertain exactly what state she will be in. On top of that, I wish for you to pretend to serve Madara until I see fit. Tell him nothing about this. Why should I? I could wipe you out here and now, Sasuke glared as the Susanoo pulled back its arrow. Otherwise, I cannot promise she will survive. He feinted concern, which was slowly replaced with a grin. I may drain her too much and she would suffer far more than she needs to. Sasuke, don't listen to him. Shikamaru burst out, we can fight him together. Yes, Sasuke, the Shade spoke, fight alongside the men and women who butchered your friend. And in that instant Sauron's mind invaded Sasuke's own, showing him the tortured and mutilated corpse of Naruto Uzumaki. No, in that instant the Konoha shinobi were forced to avoid a slash from Susanoo's ethereal blade. Things had now just become far more complicated. The Taka now stood alongside the Nazgul. Sasuke's eyes had gone mad with rage as he glared down upon his best friend's murderers. You bastards! The Shade grinned as he glided over to the comatose woman. He loved meddling with the minds of men. Now, shall we begin? That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.